I begin once again. Namaskar, very good evening, and a warm welcome to one and all. This is Nilanjana Maulik, Secretary of Alzheimer's and Related Disorders Society of India, Calcutta chapter. ARDSI Calcutta, as it is known, is one among 24 other chapters across India. We started our journey in the 99th year of the 20th century with great hope and positivity. Today, with 21 years behind us that has added experience, maturity, and understanding of the cause, we look forward to building an even better tomorrow for people with dementia and their loved ones caring for them. Our goals will continue along developing programs and services that will at large improve public awareness about dementia and improve quality of care. However, we cannot do it all by ourselves, and so we will pray for community support in every way possible. You all will agree with me that caring for people with dementia is a joint effort of all of us who can still reason and remember. So let's join the movement and create a dementia-friendly world. This World Alzheimer's Month, ARDSI Calcutta, along with other associations across the world, are encouraging everyone to know dementia, know Alzheimer's, by spotting the warning signs of dementia and to seek out information, advice, and support, which can potentially lead to a timely diagnosis, treatment, and good care. This has become even more important with emerging research showing that the neurological impact of COVID-19 on the brain can increase a person's likelihood of developing dementia. So friends, it is incredibly important that all of us take the responsibility to make ourselves aware, and what can be a better platform than tonight where we get an opportunity to hear the best of the best. Thank you once again for joining us, and here is how we will take this evening forward. We will hear out the speakers one by one, except Meera Pattabhiraman, our chairperson, ARDSI National, and D.Y. Suharya from Jakarta, all the way from Jakarta, the regional director of Asia Pacific region, Alzheimer's Disease International. They have to leave early on, so we will take their questions as they end their talk. In the meanwhile, you can also type your questions on the chat box, requesting all of you to kindly keep yourselves muted unless you need to announce an earthquake alert. So let's begin the evening with welcoming Dr. Amitavo Ghosh, a neurologist by profession and our dear president of ARDSI Calcutta chapter. He is one of those rare breed of doctors whose humility and deep respect and understanding of holistic care motivates us all. So, sir, may I invite you to address the gathering, please? Thank you. I will take a few moments to share your slides. Can you see your slides, sir?
To unmute yourself, Dr. Ghosh.
Can you hear us, sir?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. And can you see your slide?
I can see my slide. Now, who's going to move the slide, me or you?
Well, obviously me, it's in my hand.
All right, then. Okay, then I'll ask you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nilanjana, and namaskar to all of you. I can see the numbers are kind of galloping, really, and I hope there'll be many, many more who will be joining very soon. I think this community of people who are interested in Alzheimer's disease is exponentially growing, and that's extremely important because we have now come out of the stage. When I was in school and college, infectious disease was the top of the was the top in the list of what you need to control, and then came the heart diseases, and then the strokes. But now we live forever. 80 years, 90 years, 70s, nothing, it's a joke. And as a result of that, of course, we are having diseases like Alzheimer's disease. And the need of the hour is not treat and cure. As you know, in medicine, as we grow older, we understand we can't cure anything, but we can control it. And what you need to do is to control Alzheimer's disease so that we have a very good quality of life in the end. So when I'm 80, I'm 85, even if I forget, I would wish to have a very good quality of life. And the whole purpose of the direction which Alzheimer's disease management is taking is to do that. That starts with early diagnosis and then looking after the patient through the early stages of disease, of dementia as it comes, and then eventually the extremely important value of caregiving towards the later part of the life. Now, I'm going to pick up the very first part of looking after Alzheimer's disease, which is the importance of early diagnosis. And we have learned over the last 20 years or so, thanks to major research like ADNI in the US, the importance of early diagnosis. And we know that the disease starts long, long before we think we have the disease. So I should be discussing a little bit of that to kind of bring home the point to all of you who don't understand Alzheimer's disease in the scientific way. I'll try to make it easy for you. And then I'll tell you why it is getting increasingly important. I don't know how many of you are aware that we now have the first ever drug to treat Alzheimer's disease, but early on in the illness. It is not going to work when it is late. There are a lot of developments going on in the field of Alzheimer's therapeutics, that is the discovery of drugs in Alzheimer's. And it's only last year that this new drug has come. There are questions about it, but these are being sorted out, and I think we are going very much in the right direction. There are 2 or 3 more drugs which are coming, so watch this space. And then other non-pharmacological treatments, and I'll hopefully touch a little bit of that in the next minutes that I have. So let me try to explain to you Alzheimer's disease, and to do that, I need to explain to you what the brain is. Now, the brain looks like a nice soft blobby structure, but it isn't that. The brain actually, and you must have known it, we speak of hundreds and billions of networks of neurons. Now, these neurons form very complex, but very tightly coordinated networks throughout the brain. And I like to kind of explain it to you in a simple way. Look at the railway networks in your country. India is a very, very large country, and we have a huge railway network. And this railway network connects various major cities, which we call hubs, right? So we have Delhi, we have Bombay, we have Calcutta, where we are now, we have Chennai, and so many other places. Now, each hub has a major identity, if you may. So Delhi, for example, is the capital city, right? So it's a political capital of our country. Right? It's also the historical capital of the country, but there are many more in India. Bombay, the financial capital of our country. Kolkata is known as the culture capital of our country. Bangalore, which is known as the IT capital of our country, together with Hyderabad. Don't want to forget that as well. So you have these various hubs which have their own individual entities, but please notice that none of them work by themselves. So you cannot have a Delhi without a Bombay or a Kolkata connecting with it and coordinating things with it. That never happens, right? So that is exactly what is happening in the brain. The laws of the universe are same. And in the brain, you have these capitals, these major hubs, which have their own identities, which have their own functions, but they're always linked with each other and coordinating in perfect harmony with each other. So you have the frontal lobes, the front of the brain, which deals with the way we behave, the way we take decisions, the way we act out things in society. You have the temporal lobe, which is important with memory, which is important with language, which is important with recognition of who someone else is or what a thing is. temporal lobes. You have the parietal lobes, which is the center of how we orientate ourselves to our surroundings. So if I know that something is to my right or to my left, or if I give someone a direction of where to go from here, I will use a lot of my parietal lobes. So each of these lobes, and there are many more, of course, who have their independent functions. But none of these functions are totally independent of each other. So I cannot have a proper decision making, for example, unless I know what it is all about. I know the people concerned, I know the objects around. So I have to know, I have to use a lot of temporal lobe. I need also to know where what is, so to give someone a direction, you please go to the right and pick it up from there and then bring it back to me. I have to also use my parietal lobe. End of the day, I'm doing a decision-making task, but I'm using all the other connections. So that is, to cut a long story short, how the brain behaves. And in normal health, each of these hub areas and their sub-hub areas and their connections, they all work in perfect tandem with each other. And we say we are normal, right? As we age, of course, these areas dry up a bit, but they're still working in the same harmonious tandem with each other. And we say, okay, this is called normal aging. But what happens in disease is something different, something changes. Now let us say Alzheimer's disease. In Alzheimer's disease, there are some abnormal proteins, which normally are soluble proteins. They are in the brain, they're developed in the brain, and they're broken down and they're soluble, they get diluted in water and they kind of thrown out. But sometimes these soluble proteins create problems. They change their shape, they become clever. And then the brain can't remove them from the brain. They are not soluble anymore, right? So they stick to that place. And when once they start sticking to the place and more gets sticking over them, and eventually they form these little deposits, which we call plaques, for example. These proteins are different names. For example, you have the amyloid protein. There's another protein which is called the tau protein, which is again normally present in healthy people, but they behave abnormally once they're damaged as a result of this disease, which is Alzheimer's disease. Now, the funny thing is, and I'll now move to the next slide, Nilanjana, is that, Nilanjana, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Can I move to the next slide?
Yes, sorry.
So now the funny thing is these abnormal proteins are being deposited in the brain a long time before we have disease, and I'll come to that in another slide, but not now. Now, what you can see here is this x-axis down there shows time. So the more the time progresses, this is slowly moving to the right. And look at the first things which are there. Can you see my? I don't think you can't see my arrow moving, right? You can't see my arrow moving. Can I share the? Am I allowed to share the screen?
Yes, you can. So I have to stop sharing them.
Yeah, can I just do that? So.
Do you want me to stop sharing?
But anyway, just have a look. So look at these colors. The red arrow, for example, and the purple one. See, those are the first things that are happening. So abnormal proteins are being deposited there. Now these are happening first. So these are called, you have amyloid, and you have tau and all the other things. The blue there is the tau protein. So these are being deposited first in the brain, and they start producing damage. Several years, sometimes decades after they are deposited in the brain, then you have these changes, which is kind of the indigo colored one, the arrow before the green one, and that is where the MRI changes come in the brain. So the brain starts having structural changes. So those areas, those hubs I was speaking to you about, those hubs are now at last can't take it anymore, and they are starting to break down, and that breakdown is now visibly seen by us in MRI scans and in PET scans and so and so. But mind you, before that, several years, 10, 15 years have passed when abnormal proteins were being deposited in the brain, and the damage was going on and on and on. And by the time we see these imaging changes in the brain, we are starting to worry. But then we do not do imaging, we don't do MRI scans in every individual on Earth. We have to do scans on people who usually come to us with some symptom, and that is when we do these tests. Now, the MRI scan, of course, therefore goes unnoticed. The MRI changes therefore goes unnoticed because the patient still hasn't developed any disease, any sign of illness. Eventually they do, and when they do, and that is the green block you have there, that is where the first symptoms start developing. And the first symptoms are the symptoms from normal. They slowly move to a stage which is called mild cognitive impairment, where you start having problems with your memory. You may be noticing that, you may not be noticing that, others might have noticed that. We do tests and we say, okay, yes, you have a bit of problem here, but don't worry. There's still a lot of things to do, but you haven't developed dementia. When we say dementia, what we mean is a person has to have functional problems in fairly common, non-complex day-to-day activities. So when they start having problems like that in something which they should routinely do, and they are having problems, and these problems are being repetitively noticed, then in the presence of these cognitive impairments, we say the person is developing dementia. That is kind of the last stage of this whole story, which is known as the Alzheimer's continuum. So the Alzheimer's continuum has started long ago with development of the proteins in the brain, and eventually ends up in the stage which we now know as Alzheimer's dementia. And the problem we have in our hands is that we do not, as of now, have treatment of Alzheimer's dementia to any extent, except, as I told you right at the beginning, only this year, well, about a year and a half, that we have discovered, or kind of the FDA in the USA have approved the first proper disease modifying drug for Alzheimer's disease, and that has just come. Until now, we had no treatment. We had treatments for Alzheimer's disease, like drugs, of donepezil and rivastigmine and memantine and drugs like that. They do not modify the disease. So you are not going to slow down the disease progression to any extent, definitely not beyond the first couple of years. And then the disease continues to progress. What we need is a strategy by which we have to stop that. We can't stop that, of course, so we have to slow that down. Now, how do we slow that down? The best thing we can do to slow it down is then to diagnose these diseases as early as possible. Now, I will go to the next slide, Nilanjana, please.
Yes, sir.
And I go to your time frame. Look at the time frame. This is the same thing you've seen in the last slide, except it just gives you a time frame. So you see a lot of things which are going up. These are the bad things. The bad things are increasing, right? And the damage in the brain is the ones which are going down. So the healthy brain is going worse. So that is going down. So there are two sections. The upper section are the bad things which are getting worse, and the one below is the damage which is getting slowly worse. And you look at the time frame, 20-25 years before the first symptom, which is zero. So the zero line there, the dotted line, this is the first symptom. And 20-25 years have passed when the damage was going on. Now, we still cannot, unless we have, a gene in a family, and Alzheimer's disease genes are very, very, very rare. So that's kind of out of question. So we cannot diagnose at the stage of these abnormal protein depositions, because that requires kind of the whole money for all the country's GDP to do that, and that's impossible. What we can do, on the other hand, is we can diagnose at the very earliest stage of the clinical symptoms. So people come to you saying, Doc, you know, I think I'm forgetting. And what we used to do some years ago, and still those who are not cognitive specialists probably still do, they do a quick assessment, probably an MMSE and things like that. They find this is perfectly all right. In a very high intellectual person, an MMSE of 28 could mean nothing. It would still mean the patient is having problems inside. But we look at that MMSE and say, hey, you're perfectly all right, don't worry. You must be very anxious and depressed. Please get this treatment and come back. We practically used to push these patients away when they came to take help. Now we've become clever, and now, thanks to the last 20 years of research, and we are not doing that anymore. We are saying, okay, we'll do much more detailed assessments, neuropsychological assessments, and we'll do MRI scans if it's part of the PET scans. And of course, now we are increasingly suggesting, now that the medicines are coming, that you should also do lumbar punctures, CSF studies, lumbar puncture studies, where we take fluid out of your back to test those very proteins that I said were being deposited in the brain. And when we can test those proteins, and if those proteins are negative, we think in one way. If the proteins are positive, we think in another way. So it's very, very important for decision making for people like us, and for the benefit of all of the patients who come early, that these lumbar puncture and these protein tests should be done. So that's the other thing we're doing now. Of course, there are very, very costly PET scans called which look at the amyloid and the tau proteins in the brain, but they are beyond most people in most countries of the world, and I don't think it's yet still time, a long time before we can do that. So that is the stage that we need to do. We need to diagnose early. So essentially, that is the importance of the early diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, because we have to catch you early. And the latest stage is the stage where you have MCI, or even early, very mild Alzheimer's disease, because beyond that, we have no treatment available. Now, just a little 2 words about treatment. I'm not looking at the watch, so how long do I have left, Nilanjana? 5 minutes?
You have 5 minutes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So just a couple of things. The importance of early diagnosis, what we are doing now. I've spoken to you about the drug. Right? It's called aducanumab, and it's in the market, and you can read that up. And it's only given for patients, selected patients with mild cognitive impairment and with early or mild Alzheimer's disease. So anything beyond that, we cannot use it. Of course, it's very costly. There are various issues with that, but at least it's the market. There will be competition, and I'm sure the price will come down. So I think we should be watching this space very, very closely. Things will change very quickly. Now, the other thing we are doing is non-pharmacological therapy. A few words about non-pharmacological therapy. One is things you can change: depression, anxiety, right? Loneliness. Okay? So all of these things are reversible things. And I think we are looking carefully at these and trying to change them in patients where we find a developing mild cognitive impairment, because they can actually speed up the process of this breakdown of the brain. Number 2, lifestyle. You know, healthy lifestyle, good diet. There are a lot of things in diet, including omega-3 fatty acids and various other things. I don't have time to discuss that. Walking, physical exercises, socializing. All of these things have been shown to be important. They do not change the course of the disease, but they will kind of steady you for some time, and the patients feel considerably better. Sometimes depression improves, if nothing else. And that in the long run helps in the patient coping with the memory disorder better. And once they do that, then the disease can take a little time to, it gives them a little more time. Ginkgo, one drug extract which is easily available. You could try that. So various non-pharmacological things are there, and we ourselves have been doing a lot of research in what we can do on non-pharmacological therapy of Alzheimer's disease. And I will give you a very sneak peek of a research we have done, and which is now submitted and under review. And hopefully I can present that in a much bigger scale later on. But Nilanjana, if you show me the one next slide. Now, I was talking to you about breakdown of the networks. Now, what if we can strengthen the networks which are still present there? What if we can not prevent, but delay the breakdown of these networks? How can we strengthen those things which are there? One of the things we can do is, now let me give you a 1-minute analogy. You know, people have osteoarthritis, you know, the knee arthritis pain. If you have pain early on, if you do exercises early on, since when you were young, regular exercises, running, jogging, and all the things, you are healthy, and your joints and bones, they are full of, they have good enough of fluids, and they're not damaged. They survive old age. But sometimes we don't do that. We hardly do our exercises, and the arthritis sets in. When the arthritis sets in and you're in trouble, you go to the doctor will say, they will still tell you to do exercises, but they will ask you not to climb stairs, not to bend, and so many other things, so that the knee doesn't, there's no extra pressure on the knee. But on the other hand, you do exercises which are isometric. You just don't move the knee, but you do exercises. So what we have put that analogy here, and how do we exercise the brain? That was the question we had. And I think one way we decided was something which is a pretty commonly being practiced nowadays worldwide, but hasn't been looked as much in Alzheimer's and MCI so far, is meditation. And we have done a kind of a protocol for meditation, very simple, very easily reproducible. And we did research on this. And this is, as I said, a little sneak peek, and you will see the figures of the brain. These are cortical thickness, so the gray matter thickness of the left hemisphere. And you see on the left side, the more yellow ones. Yellow is better. You can see a scale in one corner. Yellow means the thickness is increased, more cortical thickness. And the bluer it gets, it is less cortical thickness, so the brain is thinner. And you can see in the left hemisphere of the brain here, in the meditation group, which are the top two, you can see there's a huge lot of increase in the cortical thickness of the brain. So we have managed to increase the gray matter thickness of the brain to a pretty large extent compared to the non-meditation group, those who did not meditate, and that is at the bottom, where there's a significant thinning of the brain. And that, by the way, happened only in 6 months' time. And you can imagine what is going to happen in more longitude. So we are doing longitudinal studies for several years, but this is your 6-month data. So we're pretty happy about it. And so we've submitted this now. So this is what non-pharmacological, this is what meditation can do, and various other non-pharmacological interventions can do. And who are these patients we have worked on? Patients with MCI and mild Alzheimer's disease, exactly the same patients for which the new drug has been approved, and without the cost of the drug, without the side effect of the drug, without anything. So I would like to end here, because I think my time would be over by now, encouraging you, and I hope everybody else will, to please try to get the diagnosis as early as possible, because there are huge benefits to have. And I think if you miss this chance, it'll be too late really for everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your talk. So we will go to our next speaker. Now, some of you, you have a problem hearing well. I mean, at least I can hear Dr. Ghosh very well. So I'm wondering what is the issue with a few of you. You cannot hear well. That's what we see on the chat box. If you can try and increase your volume, whether it's your phone or your laptop computer that you're working from, try and see that, please. Thank you so much. So our next speaker for the evening is DY, as we call her. She is the Regional Director of Asia Pacific Region, Alzheimer's Disease International, and she's based in Jakarta. DY Why, to me, the name basically represents energy, positivity, and getting things done. Let's hear her give us a global picture and a regional picture of dementia. So welcome to you, DY. Give me a few seconds as I share your screen.
Thank you, Nilanjana. Thank you so much for inviting me. Nilanjana for me is also representing energy and passion, and I'm so happy to be here with my friend Nilanjana and Mira. And thank you, Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, for your presentation, because timely diagnosis is definitely the theme for World Alzheimer's Month this year. So from the global and regional context of dementia, this theme, no Alzheimer, no dementia, timely diagnosis, it's basically the theme that we chose of shining on the importance of the 10 warning signs of dementia. Next slide, please, Nilanjana. So I'm a regional director of Alzheimer's Disease International, Asia Pacific, but I was actually the founder of Alzheimer's Indonesia, and that's how I met Mira Patabiraman in 2013. In 2014, I had a chance to also attend the 2014 conference. ARDSI was hosting that conference. And as a member, at that time, I was the executive director of Alzheimer's Indonesia. I learned so much from ARDSI. And in 2016, I received a mandate to be the regional director of Asia Pacific, helping 20 other countries. And the experience of establishing my own association in 2013 had helped me to understand the big picture, why this is important. My mom was diagnosed with dementia in 2009, and that really led me to know that the more information, the more knowledge you know, it really empowers you. And it's aligning with the ADI's vision that's established in 1984 in improving quality life for people with dementia. And how do we do that? Through your support, through members, in applying all the principles of participation, putting people with dementia involved in the programs, and also understanding the journey of caring. So ADI is the umbrella organization of Alzheimer's and Dementia Association. We have more than 100 members, 105 at the moment, and 20 countries in Asia Pacific. And we work on advocacy from the Italian word of advocare. We walk hand in hand with people with dementia and family caregivers through the support of association. In this case, ARDSI Calcutta actually has a special place in my heart, because after I went to New Delhi in 2014, I had a chance exactly on 22nd September 2017 to be in Calcutta attending your conference there. And a year later, I know ARDSI on a national level submitted your dementia plan strategy, and that's really important from a global and national context. Yes, thank you, Supriya. I saw you in the chat room as well. Although we are in our houses or wherever we are, I just feel the energy, the warmth from all of you. And we're really lucky to be a part of ADI, because it's a family of people that's committed in supporting people with dementia and family caregivers, including ARDSI Calcutta. Next slide, please. Yes. So from the global and regional context of dementia, so from the global impact of dementia, we know the WHO recently announced that there are 55 million people with dementia. Starting this year, it was 50 million, and now it's 55 million people with dementia, 23 million in Asia Pacific, and I think around 4 to 5 million in India, people with dementia. And every 3 seconds, someone in the world develops dementia. And the total estimated annual worldwide costs, the numbers are staggering, $1.3 trillion. And it will be increased to $2.8 trillion by 2030. and achieving the momentum required to obtain the targets set out in the Global Action Plan. So what happened was, on my next slide, all countries in 2017 in WHO committed in putting dementia as a national priority, including India. So we continue to advocate on global and regional and local level. A global health crisis, 7th leading cases in the world, requires a truly global response, regional and a national response, and action at all levels. So we work closely with WHO and other multinational bodies, including G20 and UN, in order to ensure that dementia maintains a multilateral presence and strengthening regional and national networks, and definitely working closely with civil society. Next slide, please. So maintaining dementia as a public health priority requires a local response. As I mentioned earlier, in 1984, 4 leaders from 4 countries, United States, UK, Canada, and Australia, decided to build a network, Alzheimer's Disease International. We continue to advocate to the WHO and UN from the global context. And we increase our multilateral presence in OECD, G7, G20, and we strengthen the regional network at a civil society and government level. I'm very proud of ARDSI's work. I think in 2018, as I mentioned, it's in the cover page. I don't know if you can see this, but it's in the cover page of our From Plan to Impact report, how important it is to submit your dementia strategy to your government, and how we can help in achieving the standards of the Global Dementia Action Plan. Next slide, please. So these are the 7 action areas: dementia as a public health priority, awareness and friendliness. This is what you're doing right now as part of the advocacy and awareness and friendliness, risk reduction, diagnosis, treatment, care and support, support for dementia carers, information system for dementia, and dementia research and innovation. I know India is part of the STRIDE program in strengthening responses. And also, I really, again, Nilanjana has a special place in my heart because she is definitely the champion on dementia care skills training that I believe in 2018 had really grown. The 2018, we actually invited Nilanjana and Dr. Savarna in Jakarta, Indonesia, and the training program has actually been replicated, has been conducted, has been involving many other champions on the ground. Really appreciate that work because that's how it works. Like from not knowing knowledge, we conduct these training to empower people to play their part. And for the Global Action Plan on Dementia, I believe ARDSI Calcutta has really stepped up in making sure the contribution of all these 7 action areas. Next slide, please. Yes, we are proud of Nilanjana as well. Thank you for your comment in the chat room. So every September, people come together all around the world, raising awareness, World Alzheimer's Month, challenging the stigma. And this marks the 10th year of the Global Awareness Raising campaign. It's very important because this is the momentum of putting the pressure, getting the government, getting all organizations to do their part. And dementia is an invisible disability, and we need every government to sign up to deliver their national awareness campaigns. And I believe when I actually was doing all these awareness raising campaign back in 2013, the Ministry of Health, my Minister of Health, literally said that the association had created too much noise, and that led them to do something about it. And that's something that we thought, you know, it always has to be consistent. I remember again in 2017 when Mira, representing ARDSI, actually attended the bi-regional meeting in Jakarta, Indonesia, and that led to more and more consistency on the advocacy work and giving the kind of pressure for the government to do something about this. Of course, civil society plays a significant part on that, and that's where all of you play a role in this journey. Next slide, please. So, so countries holding World Alzheimer's events, activities, it's from 60 countries in 2014. And last year we have 97. We're hoping more this year, around 100 and more. Next slide, please. And we have also strengthened the whole social media impact. How we really appreciate your title of this webinar, this event, No Dementia, No Alzheimer. We really encourage you to use this hashtag. From 800,000 impressions on social media. Last year, we reached 20 million. And we're hoping, because this hashtag is going to be is being used, we give more acknowledgement and we give more pressure on the importance of dementia and timely diagnosis, which is the theme this year. Next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, and also much appreciated by Dr. Ghosh's presentation earlier on how the importance of receiving a diagnosis, a timely diagnosis, is important. And it's also often a challenging and difficult process. Stigma surrounding dementia means that many avoid seeking a diagnosis until the very late stages. And this is something common. It happens everywhere around the world, and we need to change this, and we know we can change this together. As mentioned by Nilanjana earlier, in the beginning, we really can't do this by ourselves. It's a joint effort. I think we have champions, all of you, we have a cause, we have a commitment, we have collaboration, and we contribute our part, our highest potential in making this happen. Next slide, please. So these are the examples of the World Alzheimer's Month posters around the world with different languages, but basically sending the same key message that it's important to know these 10 warning signs of dementia. The earlier we know, the better. And I myself, as a caregiver for my mom, back then, I realized that once I realized these things, it's easier to navigate the journey of caring. Next slide. So I think I saw earlier somebody asked about, what are the symptoms? And these are the two examples. The 10 warning signs on the right is adaptation of the 10 warning signs in Indonesia. We created this in 2013, and now in 2021, we have the ADI version of 10 warning signs: memory loss, difficulty performing familiar tasks, problems with language, disorientation to time and place, poor or decreased judgment, problems keeping track of things, misplacing things, changes in mood and behavior, challenges understanding visual and spatial information, and withdrawal from work or social activities. And these are the things that you need to be aware. Of course, again, like my mom was diagnosed in 2009, but 20 years before that, she already showed these symptoms. But at that time, I had no knowledge. It was very difficult for our family in understanding why she behaved a certain way. And I realized once people know these, and as an association, you can really share this information. The more people know these information, the more empowered they are. Next slide, please. So I really would like to invite you all to attend our World Alzheimer's Report launch this Tuesday. It's 1 p.m. UK time, and it's a journey through the diagnosis of dementia. So ADI will be hosting this webinar with McGill University Research Center in Studies in Aging and the McGill Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences. So this report aims to obtain a global perspective on the current dementia diagnosis. And this report was basically contribution from clinicians, people living with dementia, and caregivers, resulting in over 3,500 responses to our online surveys. And at least 50%, despite the WHO Global Action Plan on Dementia target of at least 50% of countries diagnosing half of the estimated number of people with dementia by 2025, this report shows that up to 90% of people in lower and middle income countries still go undiagnosed. So there's disruption to diagnosis in combination with enforced isolation that have increased cognitive decline in many of those people living with dementia, especially in the pandemic era. Next slide, please. So this is the cover of the World Alzheimer's Report. As I mentioned earlier, 50% of countries to be diagnosing 50% of the estimated number of people with dementia by 2025. That's the target for every country. And there's expert essay in this report by your experts, Dr. Suvarna and Jayita Rajagopalan. And ADI also estimates 75% of people globally are not diagnosed, as high as 90% in some low and middle income countries. And 75% equals to over 41 million people not diagnosed. So we really invite you to attend this World Alzheimer's Report launch exactly on World Alzheimer's Day this Tuesday. Next slide, please. To sign up to the report launch, this is the link, bit.ly/2x6pvjf. Definitely still invite, we welcome you all to attend. And the report will be launched on the 21st September. And we hope by all of our effort this year, World Alzheimer's Month, timely diagnosis, our effort. I know your government is committing to Action Area 2, awareness, friendliness, Action Area 4, diagnosis, treatment, and care, also support for caregivers. We hope also there's going to be the support for the entire 7 action areas. Next slide. So I'd like to end this by actually welcoming you all to, again, the hashtag No Dementia, No Alzheimer, to always support the association, ARDSI Calcutta, and also attend the webinar on 21st September. And please do everything you can to play your part in activating your highest potential. Again, huge appreciation to ARDSI Calcutta, ARDSI National, and really look forward to see you again on the 21st September, World Alzheimer's Day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, DY. As usual, loud and clear message taken. So thank you for that information. What we will do now is, because you have to leave, you have to attend to other important meetings, we will take questions from the crowd. Is there anybody out there who has a question for DY? We know you have questions for Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, but we will take all of that later at the end of everybody's presentation. So now if you have questions for DY, please go ahead and ask. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Supriya. I saw in the chat room, appreciating the presentation, much appreciated. I appreciate your work, actually, because again, we can't do our work as a global federation, putting person with dementia as a priority without all of your contributions. So I thank you all, 96 people attending this meeting. Thank you so much.
Nilanjana, there are 2 people who have raised their hands, so I guess.
Yes. So Dr. Shubhranshu Adityo, you can unmute yourself and place your question, please.
Yes, thank you, Nilanjana madam.
Thank you.
I was also present in your lecture a few days back.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered from DY's presentation that what I asked in my a previous program where Nilanjana madam talked about dementia, current scenario, the problem is there all over the world. The problem is everyone, including Dr. Ghosh, he also mentioned that early diagnosis is very important so that early intervention can be started, so that we can preserve cognitive reserve as much as we can. But this logical thing is available to us who have an inside knowledge about this. But the problem here we find, especially in India and the eastern part of India where I reside, that people, the family members, they get very much scared of the diagnosis. So even if we point them that this might be indicator of early signs of dementia, because I was very much fascinated by the charts Dr. Ghosh was displaying in his presentation, that how we can have early diagnosis, which are the biomarkers are available, which were not available previously. But people, they are very reluctant to go for a clinical assessment. In diagnosis intervention, they are very distant things. Now, you are doing a great job regarding awareness building. That's happening. But other than that, what really works globally to reduce this kind of stigma or this reluctance to get the diagnosis or get the assessment done? What really works and what does not? I want to listen the global experience from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Subrangshu Aditya. I appreciate your question. It's a very good question. I actually, so from the global context, I actually would like to also share that, again, ADI has 105 members around the world, and I have been interacting with 20 members in Asia Pacific, and under Mira's leadership on ARDSI, actually, they have taken a step up on all the things, the tools on impact measurement, the tools on dementia skills training and all that. And when you ask about what really works, every country has their own strengths, but I think the key word is actually commitment, leadership, governance, and also, putting person with dementia as a priority. And if it's all aligned with all these contexts, countries that don't have good leadership or don't really, really include our main beneficiary, people with dementia and family caregivers, it has to be a multidisciplinary kind of support and effort. And that's something that is, again, because dementia is everybody's business, that's something that needs to be, that's something that is actually the formula, understanding everybody play a role on that. So there's no one size fits all for this, but as long as you're committed and there's all these kind of standard pillars of how an organization and association commit in making things happen, how, again, leadership and governance, the program, and the impact. So I think at the end of the day, because we have the global context, those 7 action areas, and every chapters have a role in making sure that they contribute to these 7 action areas. So that, and they identify their own assets on this. And again, ARDSI Calcutta has excellent assets that have been demonstrated all these times. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Indrani Mitru, please, your question, please. Kindly unmute yourself and question. We also have Mr. Uddin, Muhammad Uddin. You can unmute yourself and put forward your question, please. Are you able to figure out how to unmute?
Otherwise, you can put your question in the chat box.
Yes, if you are unable to unmute yourself, please put the question on the chat box and DY would be able to answer.
Yeah. Sure.
Looks like they're taking time. So you're going to be here for some time, right? DY, or are you going to leave? You're going to leave after Mira, right?
Yes, I'll leave after Mira. Yeah. I have another.
So what we're going to do is, if you don't mind, we will start with Mira, and then at the end of it, we will take both yours and Mira's questions together. Okay?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So, so we will go ahead now with our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen. My absolute honor to invite Meera Pattabhiraman, Chairperson, ARDSI National. I've known her since I joined ARDSI way back in 1999. I believe we share a bond beyond dementia. Meera, please enlighten us with the way forward in India. Thank you so much.
Namaste. Good evening to all. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you, Nilanjana and the Calcutta chapter for inviting me to be talking at this webinar, No Dementia, No Alzheimer's. As Nilanjana said, we are both grown with ARDSI. We've been there for more than 20 years, and she is really very passionate. That's something which DY also has. I've seen something very common with both of them, and both of them are totally passionate, and that's how the hard work is seen. So we all listened to this excellent presentation from DY, where I was thinking that she's going to talk about the Asia Pacific context, but no, she spoke about the global level. So she covered everything from how the start of ADI, and then the global action plan, and then she invited all of you to the launch on the 21st of September. So I second her invitation, and it'll be nice to have a large number of persons from India attending the launch. I myself registered, and I hope many of you will register. So, this pandemic for us and the lockdown has really affected all of us, and especially persons with dementia, because they are in the vulnerable category. And the lockdown, in fact, affected them much more than the pandemic as such. And we at ARDSI too had to suspend a few of our activities. But fortunately, things are now returning to a semblance of normalcy, and ARDSI is now back with full vigor and energy, and we are raring to go. And our primary agenda is to get the government to have a national plan. Okay, Nilanjana, next slide, please. Oh, as you are all aware, India is the second most populous country in the world. This itself is a huge challenge because of the sheer numbers. Every problem gets magnified. Whether it is the pandemic, in the second phase, we saw so many people affected. And take vaccinations, even that is a huge problem. We share it with Indonesia. Even for them, the problem of numbers is what makes any problem really difficult. Vaccinations, yesterday was our Prime Minister's birthday, and then we had 2 crore people vaccinated. And, so we have covered about 80 crore people, but still we have a long way to go because of our large population. The number of elderly itself in our country is over 100 million. So this is the latest figure we have, 5.91 million persons with dementia in India. We were thinking it was 5.3, but Narendra, he referred to our India Dementia report, which we published in 2010, and this is the current figures. And in India, what has happened now? Because of urbanization, we have moved from the joint family to the nuclear family. So the impact of dementia on the family is really very big. It's huge. And then people don't have much knowledge about dementia. So that is also very difficult. And we have very few residential care centers. Long-term care centers are very common in other countries, but not in our part of the world. We take care of them at home. One thing I would like to say here is, actually for us, what works well is taking care of persons in our homes and not necessarily put them in a full-time home. We have a huge population. So what we should do is train a big workforce who can take care of the elderly, be trained to take care of dementia, and this will work best for us. So this is what we need to do. But people also lack access to timely information on or advice on how to say. This is the earlier question they asked, what was asked to DY. Why is it we are reluctant to go see a doctor? There are several factors that DY rightly explained, also because of lack of awareness, the stigma which is attached to it. All this complicates issues. So fundamentally, we need more awareness. And then, of course, lack of policies and plans. Next slide, please. So the basic thing is we have 5.9 million people living with dementia. And the sad part is, as DY said again in our report, she said 90% of the persons in the LMIC countries don't get a diagnosis. That is very true of India also. Only 10% of the cases get diagnosed. And this diagnosis also happens in an advanced stage of the disease. And that's why Dr. Ghosh so nicely said it is critical to have an early diagnosis. That is very important, especially both for the person with dementia as well as for the family caregivers. And Dr. Ghosh, I was really amazed to hear about the benefits of meditation. This is something which anybody can do. And if it has got such beneficial advantages, I think we should really go ahead and, make more advocate for this in a bigger way. Because in India, many elderly people I know all like to do meditation. And if such a protective factor, I think we should really advocate. I would like to know more about it when you're publicizing the results. So at present, we have about 5.9 million people. This will go up to 7.6 million in 2030. And by 2050, we'll have a whopping 14 million persons with dementia. And if you look at the costs, right now we have 210 billion. These are the societal costs. And this will go up to 302 billion in 2030 and 568 billion by the year 2050. So this is a very big expense for our country. So definitely we need to, address this and start right now. Next slide, please. And this is what I said earlier, this low awareness and stigma. And these are the two factors for delayed diagnosis, because people don't even go to the doctor. They don't think it is a medical issue. They think it is normal part of aging. And then again, there are very few diagnostic centers, very few diagnostic tools, specialized persons, and insufficient number of care. In this figure, I have not changed 5.3 to 5.2, but you will see at the top of the graph is the number of people with dementia. At the bottom of the graph are the memory clinics and the care services. So what we have is very negligible for the needs and demands of our country. Next slide, please. Yeah. So now let us look at our challenges from two angles. One, from the angle from the context of the family caregivers and persons with dementia. And the other is from the broader perspective. Of course, what I said first, lack of awareness of the general public. What happens? Most of them think that this is just normal part of aging. And unless it goes to such an extent that the behavioral problems become so big, only then they go to a doctor. That is why majority of the cases don't even get a diagnosis. Second, there's also lack of awareness among the medical professionals, community and health workers. This ADI brought out a report a couple of years back, and that it was said that knowledge among the healthcare professionals is very low. And right now, as DY said, India is part of a research study called STRIDE, Strengthening Responses to Dementia in the Developing Countries. And we have a work package on stigma. As part of that, the results are yet to be published, but I'm sure the findings will show that, the knowledge among healthcare professionals is pretty low in our country. So what we need, what is the way forward? The other thing is geriatrics is not given much importance in the medical curriculum and in the nursing curriculum. And how many colleges, medical colleges have a separate geriatric department? Because that much of importance is not given to geriatrics as such. So these things have to change. We need to have nationwide awareness programs. One state which has had good awareness programs is Kerala. So we can see the difference. But nationwide, since ARDSI has been there for the past 25 years, we have been doing awareness programs, especially during World Alzheimer's Month. There are massive awareness programs. But even then, most of it happens in the urban areas. So the rural areas, there's still very little awareness about dementia. And then we also need to train medical professionals, community workers, healthcare workers, so that these are the people who are going out into the community. So they will be able to recognize and advise the people where to seek advice and help. Next slide, please. Now we look at the challenges faced by caregivers. So there are hardly any, security schemes for family caregivers, and even if they are there, they're not aware of that. And there's again a lack of geriatric workforce. And at some point we really have to step in here, and that is where this training. DOI is talking about training. And we have started with DCS training. What we need is for the government to come in and train, like NISD and other governmental organizations to come in and have massive training program. And then talk about the care services, the residential care, the daycare centers. Where are they located? Only in a few big cities. And for our population, they are negligible. And also they are not affordable to all. Unless the government steps in here again, we will not be able to meet the requirements in the form of setting up of care services. So the way forward is, in Kerala, we have the Kerala State Initiative where the government has come forward to set up daycare and residential care facilities. Right now we have only 2 centers, but the aim is to set up 1 daycare and 1 residential care in all the districts of Kerala. And the second model is that, we had a study by Amit Dias in 2009, which said community workers can play a big role. They can provide assistance to go to the homes and provide help and guidance to the caregivers. And in this way, the stress on the caregivers comes down drastically, and they also have better knowledge on what are the strategies of coping. So these are the 2 models that will help, and what we can do to help caregivers. Next slide, please. Of course, the biggest challenge we have at the moment is the government is yet to recognize dementia as a national health priority. This is crucial. We have been advocating it for the past several years, from 2010, when we brought out the Dementia India report. Since then, we have been advocating it. But we are hopeful. There's only 1 state, that is the state of Kerala, where we have a definite plan. It is called the Kerala State Initiative on Dementia. But we definitely need a national plan and state plans like the one we have in Kerala in other states as well. Next slide, please. Yeah. DY spoke at length about the global action plan, and she also showed you the 7 action areas. And, this was launched in the year 2014 in Geneva. Our own health minister, Mr. Nadda, was present at that meeting, and he endorsed this plan. So that is why we took a cue from that, and he said, okay, we have to step up our advocacy measures. So what we did in India is we brought out a Dementia India strategy report, which will pave the way for a national plan for India. So this was the report which was handed over to our health minister, Sri Nadda, at a national conference in Bangalore. In fact, our ADI CEO, Paula Barberino, was present there, and that was the picture that DY showed on the impact. Yeah, that is what she showed. So our inspiration was the 7 action areas. So in our dementia strategy report, we have all these 7 action areas, but we have customized it to the Indian context. We have also said what is the budget that has to be given to these action areas, and then where we can tackle them. Because when we are talking to the officials in the government, they tell us right now it is we are not able to give money for a full plan. So we said, okay, at least for these areas, we can allot certain amount of money so that we can start straight away and address, say, whether it is training or risk reduction. And there are certain schemes, for instance, under the NCD, we can do risk reduction. So, and under the policy for older persons, we can address some of them. So we have indicated to the government how we can go about it. And we have also handed it over to Dr. Harshvardhan So both the previous ministers, we have given it, and we hope to see the new minister soon to see that, something good will come out of it. And actually, we had we were making good progress. And at that point, the pandemic struck. So, then all this went on a back burner, but we are hoping that something will good, because on World Alzheimer's Day, the Ministry of Health, along with WHO, has called for a meeting, and I will be attending the meeting. So we are hoping that at least some positive statement will come on the 21st, when the Ministry of Health and WHO, along with ARDSI and other stakeholders, are having a meeting. At it is a part virtual, part in-person meeting. So keeping fingers crossed that something good will come out of it. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is the Kerala story, which I told you, which has been really very good. This is the first public-private partnership in all of India. It is between the Social Welfare Department of the Government of Kerala, Kerala Social Security Mission, and Alzheimer and ARDSI. So Kerala is the first state to recognize that dementia is a health priority. So the aim is to create massive awareness. We have been very successful in this because we had 2 statewide awareness programs. The program went from the northernmost district to the southernmost district. It went for 14 days. And Kerala, I can tell you, is the most dementia literate state in all of India. And we have 1 residential care and 1 daycare center. We are hoping to start in other districts. We are in touch with the government. The government is also planning to have memory clinics attached to government hospitals, because that is the only way we can increase diagnosis. And then they've also done is to train healthcare workers and to train community workers like the ASHA workers, so that we have done many courses for them, especially with the 10 warning signs, because they are the ones who are going into the community. And if they find that any of the persons, they have any of these 10 warning signs, they can tell them this is not normal part of aging and you need to get medical attention. So this is a model which can be replicated in many states. In fact, we are trying in other states like Maharashtra and in Karnataka. And something similar, it can be modified to the health framework of that state, but we definitely need more states to come up with their own plans, because ultimately health is a state subject in India. So we need tandem, both the center and the states to work in tandem to deliver services for persons with dementia. Yes, Nilanjana? Yeah, as I said, it's a good model for other states. Then this is the sudden thing, unexpected thing, what happened? The pandemic, suddenly we had all sorts of new challenges for persons with dementia. And because persons with dementia fall in the vulnerable category, they are mostly the elderly. So suddenly they found, as I said, not just the pandemic, it was the lockdown which created more problems for them. They had difficulty in getting medical help. Then, the centers, for instance, the daycare centers run by ARDSI had to be closed without any notice. So suddenly they could not go anywhere, and they were all constrained in the homes. And if they're just elderly husband and the wife, and the spouse had to take care of the person with dementia. And in India, we have this, persons like the maid or the cook or even some other relative, they just come over and they do training. I do caring. So they may not be qualified or they won't have specialized training, but still they'll be there as help, and they'll take care of this person. Suddenly such persons stop coming. So the onus on the elderly person to do the household work plus take care of the person with dementia was a very big strain on that person. And even if they had family members, they could not come at that time because of the sudden lockdown. Travel was not possible. And then they could not meet the regular doctors in person. They could not see them. And even the safety precautions to be taken, for instance, wearing of masks, social distancing, persons with dementia like a hug, but suddenly they were not able to see their friends, families, neighbors. All this is very confusing and it took a big toll on. And another thing is, we in India right now don't have any data about the number of persons with dementia who were affected, how many fatalities were there, and what is the deterioration that these persons went through, which would not have happened if the pandemic was not there. We have very little data about that. So we definitely need to collect data on, how persons with dementia and their families faced additional problems because of the pandemic. And based on that, we have to devise measures and services to help them so that at least in future, they won't feel this kind of challenge. One thing was, there is telemedicine, but how many persons can do telemedicine? It's only, and that happened only at a later stage. So we have to really see how we can address their problems. Next slide, please, Nalindana. Yeah. Ultimately, what are we looking for? We want to have a dementia-friendly environment. That's what we need. And the place where persons with dementia can live with purpose and dignity, where they are not discriminated against. There is no stigma. And then they have a sense of, being safe, that they're not, they're not isolated, because a lot of families tell us what we feel is they're getting isolated. So we don't want anything like that. But we can do this in a small way. See, we can either start with a small hospital or, a restaurant, any place, a small place we can take. In fact, just now, a little while ago, the Suvarna had posted on our group that NIMHANS is trying to make that area where they are as a dementia-friendly community. So these are the sort of things we should try. In fact, Melbourne was declared the first dementia-friendly airport in Australia. And Diva, if you remember, in Kuala Lumpur, we visited a mall, which is the first dementia-friendly mall in all of Malaysia. So they had a special room, where the person with dementia can be left, where the family members can go and finish the shopping, and then they can come and pick them up from this place. So that is how a small beginning can be made, and then we can expand it, and then we can make it to the surrounding place. Like this Bangalore initiative, I was very impressed with that. So ultimately, we need to have a very nice, good place where all people with dementia feel safe. So a lot needs to be done still for persons with dementia, and it's only during, by talking and making noise, as Diva said, we need to make noise, and that's the only way we can catch the attention of our policymakers and our stakeholders so that the lives of persons with dementia are improved and enriched. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for your patient listening.
Thank you, Meera. Diva, did you have a question for Meera?
No, I was just giving a pause.
Okay, sorry. I'm yet to learn all these, Okay. Difference, slight difference. The hand is a little tilted. Okay. So thank you, Meera. Thank you, DY. Both of you, I know, have to leave. If there is anybody out there who wants to clear their doubts from both the speakers, please go ahead, unmute yourself and question, because I don't see any specific question in the chat box. I see there is one from Neela. Neela, you want to place your question? Hi.
There, I'm Neela. I live in Canada, and I'm also currently in the board of Alzheimer's Society of our chapter in our city, in Ontario province and Windsor City. And this is a great presentation and great knowledge for me to see everyone coming together to trying to eradicate this, probably a world where no Alzheimer is present. And I was just wondering if there is any government funding available for these kind of, like how do you manage your funding from the perspective of, is there government funding for setting up local chapters or nothing sort of like that?
No government funding. Our association is entirely funded by ourselves, but there is absolutely no government funding. And in fact, we're not looking for government funding for our association. What we are looking for is government funding for setting up memory clinics, for setting up care services, for doing training. Absolutely. That is what we need the government to do, or, to come in and support.
Somebody out there, please, can you mute yourself? We can hear you.
And I was just wondering one more thing, like if there is any possibility of when a person from a diagnosed in a hospital and from a physician, when it's transitioned to the community, is the physicians aware of the organization so they can connect that person and the caregiver to that? So that is happening. Okay. Yeah.
Wherever there are chapters, and then, these chapters are in connection with the doctors and hospitals in that area, this happens. So for instance, in Calcutta, there's a very good collaboration between the doctors and the chapter, and that is why they're doing excellent work there. Likewise, in Trivandrum, we had a hospital there, a central government hospital, and then Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute and the chapter. So every time the diagnosis happened there, they will refer the family members to this chapter, and then we took over the social angle and the guidance. So wherever chapters are there, but they are present only in 22 cities. So wherever we are there, we are providing this kind of support once the diagnosis is made.
Thank you very much, Meera.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We will take one more question from Dr. Aditya. Please go ahead, and if you have a question from Meera or DY, please go ahead. We will have to start with the next speaker, please.
Thank you, Nilanjana Madam. I have a question for Meera Madam. Actually, I have 3 questions. You may choose which one to answer. First, very brief questions. First question is, in last 2 years, almost nearly 2 years, during the pandemic situation, what is your experience and your report? Are the cases of number of dementia cases on the rise? Number 2, the age at diagnosis, is it coming down? Are we getting dementia cases being diagnosed at an earlier age in last 2 years? Number 3, could there be in near future any policy at the government level so that there could be after a certain age, say age 40 or age 35, like pap smear in case of cervical cancer, there will be mandatory cognitive checkup or cognitive assessment. Can that be there in near future at the policy level? These 3 are my questions. Thank you.
At the policy level, I assure you, I have no knowledge about what they are trying to do because we are yet to hear from the government on this. But as regards pandemic, definitely persons with dementia have been more affected by the pandemic because they were not able to reach the doctor, and because of all the safety measurements, the precautionary things, the measures they had to take, the progression has worsened. But we don't have any empirical data on how many persons were affected because we have not been able to collect that kind of data. We assume that over the next couple of years, the number of dementia cases may increase because of the pandemic, and because, we have heard about the neurological deficit that this pandemic could have on the brain of people. But I think the doctors may be able to answer that better. But definitely, there's no doubt about it that the pandemic has affected persons with dementia.
Dr. Aditya, your second question on, whether we see younger people more, what's the age? I think
yes.
We will leave it to the doctors to answer that because they are the ones who are doing the detection in their setting. They would be able to give you a much clearer picture. So we will take it from Dr. Ghosh at the end. If there are no more questions, thank you, Meera. And what we are going to do now is we will invite our next speaker, and that is Dr. Chandramallika Boshak. She is the Associate Professor in the Center for Vital Longevity, School of Behavioral and Brain Sciences, University of Texas, Dallas, from United States of America. She's our next speaker. Here is another human being who I got to know a couple of months ago, and who is an example of how making connection across borders is the key to addressing issues. We had posted on social media for people to help us raise awareness during this month. And she was the one person who was the first to let us know that she was there to help us out. And we are grateful to you, Dr. Boshak, and we look forward to many long association with you in the near future. So may I welcome you and start your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Dr. Ghosh and Nilanjana. You both have been fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to Dr. Ghosh's meditation training effects, and talk to him more about it. We just started a Gita learning class over a whole year during the pandemic, and behaviorally on episodic memory, we're seeing benefits on the people who did Gita learning versus who were doing a different type of second language acquisition. And these are Americans who did not know anything about Sanskrit. So this is, kind of, off the ballpark and kind of interesting stuff. But let me see, how can I share my screen? I know I have, it says one participant can share at a time.
So you can see,
yeah,
share
I can
screen,
share
right?
my
Yeah.
screen.
Good.
I can, yeah. We're just making sure that people can see my screen.
Yeah.
Do you see an image of a weird island?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good. Okay, great. That's my second screen. So I just have two screens. I just want to make sure that people are seeing the right one. All right, so hopefully everybody sees a full on-screen image. I was asked by Dr. Ghosh to talk about the importance of study participants in research on prevention of dementia. So I can only talk from the perspective of USA, but I hope to answer some of the questions that have been raised about how to motivate people to participate in the studies, particularly people who are in preclinical dementia phases and so forth. I can definitely address some of that from the US perspective, and not everything has to be monetary, implementation of let's lure you into the study. There are, different approaches that we, try to kind of get people in the lab and help us participate in the study. So the talk is two aspects. The first aspect is to go over some of the research findings by me and my colleagues on prevention of dementia, which provides evidence for importance of interventions in healthy aging. And so much of my research is on healthy aging, and to a large extent on mild cognitive impairment, which is the preclinical stage of dementia. And the main reason is that, as Dr. Ghosh very nicely laid out from that Jack et al. Study, where the cascade model of dementia works, is that it's sometimes too late to do interventions when you're already in, first or second stage of Alzheimer's disease. So it's very important, as he said, to diagnose or get people as early as possible in the lab. And what he said is that the preclinical phase of dementia can be anywhere from 3 years to decades, as we know. And so the second aspect of the talk is really to emphasize the importance of study participants in such research, including those who are so-called quote unquote healthy older adults, because we know that many of these healthy older adults are probably not healthy unless we get assessments of neurobiology of their brain structure and function. It's very hard to know that are they really healthy or are they suffering from preclinical stages of dementia. Okay, sorry, pressing the wrong screen. So one of the questions that we have been interested, along with many here, is how we can slow the cognitive declines, right? So this is a model that was proposed by Herzog et al. In a seminal paper in early 2010s. So they talked about the importance of preventing dementia, and this is like a very generic model. I'm not saying that this is how dementia progresses, but imagine, and I'm going to try to see if I can use my laser pointer to show you where I'm pointing on the screen, so hopefully everybody sees it. So imagine this is the chronological age, which is increasing from, you're 20 here, 30, 40, 50, 60, all the way till 90. And this is a hypothetical, model which assumes that, hey, cognition is at your peak in your 20s and 30s and kind of, declines, slowly through your middle ages, but then around 65 and later, you have this rapid decline, which we call as normative aging. And the idea for us who are interested in interventions, we want to know is that whether we can prevent dementia by intervening. It's easy to prevent something when you can intervene early on in life, in your 20s and 30s. And there have been a lot of studies showing that your cognition at 20s and 30s can predict your, brain structure and brain function in your 50s and 60s. These are, some vet studies done in UK. But what is important to know is that how late can we start intervening, right? So can we intervene in late adulthood, in our 60s and 70s, where many of our participants or many people I speak to, they go like, oh, I really wish to keep myself engaged. Now I'm retired. I'm worried about dementia, the onset of it, and I just want to keep myself active, mentally active. So, what can I do to improve my, cognition? So the idea of interventions is that we want to intervene somewhere around here for a few months, maybe at most a year, because interventions are very expensive, very time consuming, and requires a huge, huge network of people to make it successful. So if we can intervene for some point of time in your life, and then that allows us to show that you're able to maintain your cognitive function for about 10 years, we have now shifted the age of onset of dementia from, say, this hypothetical age of 80 to 90. So that would be fantastic to notice. And this is what we call, can we maintain cognition? So the many behavioral interventions, physical fitness, cognitive training, video game training, meditation training, yoga, tai chi, a whole bunch of behavioral interventions are designed to see if we can maintain cognition over a period of time, after which you still are going to probably decline at the rate that you were supposed to decline, but now you're reaching this functional threshold of dementia, which, imagine if you have a certain MMSE or MoCA score below, a certain level, and if you hit that score, then you're diagnosed with, MCI or, early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Now, what we really want to see, and that would be great, I mean, that's the holy grail question, is forget about maintaining, can we even improve your cognition? So can we improve your cognition and the underlying brain structures and brain function through these interventions that is not only just maintaining, but improving it. So now we have the biggest bang for buck. We are able to, push this, age of onset much closer to the end of your lifespan. So this is, in other words, it's called compression of morbidity. So in other words, if, somewhere it's written that I'm going to live till like 90 years of my life, then instead of getting dementia at the age of 80 and suffering for 10 years, I would rather have dementia at the age of 89 years, 364th day, and then just suffer from dementia for one day and then die. Does that make sense? It's like the compression of morbidity. How can we compress the morbid phase of our life to as little time as possible by improving or maintaining our cognition way into late adulthood? So some of the questions that are asked to me is that, hey, so you've talked about this model, but then what are the best approaches to improve your cognition? So one of the questions that was being asked in the chat was very interesting. People asked if there is a genetic influence to dementia, right? And we know that APOE3 genes, E4 allele, which is rare in the population, it's about 50 to 25% of people who have that E4 allele. But if you have E4 allele, you have a very high risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. So the best option is to pick the right parents, go for arranged marriage, you pick your set of right parents, get genetic testing on them, and then make sure that they're not E4 carrier, and then you're probably in a good shape. Well, sadly, most of us can't do that. So, some of us, most of us don't do genetic testing, and some of us have this ill luck of falling in love. So we might not pick the set of right partners. So our children will have to look at different options. So what are the different options? So one of the options that which has been shown to be effective, not only good for heart, but also good for brain, is physical fitness training. So I'll talk a little bit of research in that domain on humans. There is a huge body of research on rodents, but my focus would be on human research. And then the second positive approach is the computer-based cognitive training. And I'm emphasizing the computer-based because the computer-based cognitive training have shown more promise than paper pencil versions of cognitive training. So it's very important to keep in mind that if you can emphasize this aspect of speed of processing, if you can it's like speed chess versus regular chess, like we play chess and we take really long time to, make the decision, versus if you are playing in a competition and you have the speed chess going on where you have to clock in your time and the time matters as well, and your decision of who is the winner, then that is a better approach for cognitive training than something where you are doing a strategy-based game training, but it's you're giving people a lot of time. So it's very important to also train the processing speed, because one of the strongest cognitive domains, one of the domains that declines in cognition the most is processing speed. In fact, it explains 90% of age-related variance in cognition. So that's the strongest marker of cognitive aging, is processing speed. So these are the two approaches we and our colleagues have used in the lab. So one is physical exercise, and most of the research that I have done is aerobic fitness training. But there are colleagues who have also looked at strength training and combination of aerobic fitness training, and that has shown to be a little bit more superior to aerobic fitness training. And then our control group is usually toning and stretching. So they're doing very low level toning and stretching activities. This doesn't mean that toning and stretching is not good for you. Every evidence from these randomized control trials, when I show, just shows that aerobic fitness training shows higher gain to brain and cognition than anaerobic fitness training, such as toning and stretching. The cognitive training approaches that most of us use are either very targeted cognitive training approaches, such as working memory training. So this is a working memory training that is that was developed in University of Michigan and Zurich, and it's now adapted in few different brain fitness programs, such as Lumosity. They have bought this program, but then you also have brain fitness programs, such as Nintendo and Posit Science. And then you also have the off-the-shelf video games that we have shown evidence for, because they're the closest that we can think of in terms of chess. And chess is the classic strategy game, but many older adults already know chess. So it's very important to train novices in these kind of randomized control trials to see if the impact of these kind of interventions are really effective or not. And feel free to ask any questions, unmute yourself and ask me anytime. So I'm going to focus mostly on brain aspects and not so much on cognition, because the changes in brain are correlated with changes in cognition. So I'm going to show some evidence, again, very an overview kind of thing of protective effects of physical activity on brain. The first evidence I'll show is impact on brain structure itself. So physical fitness training has been shown in rodents to increase gray matter volumes. And we were one of the first people, this is the 2011 paper, where we showed that physical fitness training can also attenuate decline in gray matter volumes in healthy older adults. And later studies have shown that people affected by neurodegenerative disease, such as MCI, also show these improvements in the similar regions, brain regions. So the brain regions of interest is hippocampus, which is the neural substrate of episodic memory. So episodic memory would be the kind of memory, oh, what did I eat yesterday for lunch? Or where did I spend my last birthday at? Or where was my last vacation? So these are episodes that you remember from your long-term memory, and episodic memory is one of the first cognitive marker of dementia, of mild cognitive impairment. In addition to the brain structure, I'll also talk about, show brief evidence of impact on brain functions. So in normal aging, we find that older adults who have higher fitness, they also show better task performance in executive control function tasks such as multitasking, working memory updating, where you have to constantly update information that is coming in front of you. And these improved task performances are also linked with greater brain activation in the frontoparietal brain regions. Now, frontoparietal brain regions are the brain regions that Dr. Ghosh talked about at length and talked about how these brain regions are, declining in healthy aging as well as in mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease. So they are of great interest. So let me just first show you some evidence of this Erickson et al. Paper, and what I will, as I'm talking about it, you will see how important it is to have human subject participation to do these kind of research. So this research resulted in one paper, right? It took us 5 years to do this randomized control trial. There were so many authors, co-authors in this paper, and all of us were equally invested in this research. So Kirk wrote this paper, that's why he's the first author, but Ed McCauley and Art Kramer both were co-principal investigators. This is close to $10 million grant. It is a lot of time and effort that was being put, a lot of postdocs, a lot of graduate students, and a lot of clinicians who helped collect the data on 120 older adults. It took a really long time to do the study. So let me show you how it worked. So at the baseline, we collected the structural MRI as well as functional MRI markers. We also collected measures of fitness. So one of the gold standard measure of fitness is called Vo2 Max. It's a little thing that you put on your mouth. It's a little mask. And as you're walking or running on the treadmill, with older adults, we don't ask them to run. We just ask them to walk at their comfortable pace. And as they're walking, we measure how much oxygen are they inhaling versus exhaling. So it's called volume oxygen to Vo2 max. So we looked at Vo2 max. We also did blood draw to look at the genes. So we had APOE4 allele, APOE gene with all the different alleles, but we also looked at a few other genes that are related to dopaminergic functions. And we also looked at spatial memory and other types of memory. And then these actually more than 120 older adults, so close to 200 older adults, were then randomized. Now, some of the older adults could not get brain scanned, or the brain scan failed. So there were a lot of failures in between, right? So then they get randomized into two groups. So one is this aerobic exercise group, and then one is the stretching and control. So of the 200 people, 120 people could get brain scan, blood, memory, all these measures. And so then they are divided into this aerobic fitness group and training and stretching control group. And then they do this for a whole year. So 6 months into the training. So they're coming into the lab 3 days a week for a whole year, for 45 minutes each session. This is a very long-term commitment. We literally tell older adults, please do not go on vacation. Please, or if you go for vacation, you have 2 weeks off, but don't go for 2 months vacation or something. So this is a lot of commitment by the people who are participating in the study. And so we have them come back at 6 months where we do some memory assessments, MRI and fitness assessment. And then they come back after the end of the study. So at the 1 year assessment, we do MRI, memory, fitness, and now we also do the blood draw because we wanted to see if there are any changes in phenotype. So what I want to emphasize is that it's really hard to get this kind of data, and it took us about 5 years to do a study with 120 older adults because we had to recruit thousands and thousands of people before we could find people who are eligible and willing to do the study. So the results from this study show that, and I apologize for the blurry image that I see here. It looks better on my smaller screen. So what you see here is the baseline assessment 6 months later and 1 year later. And this is the volume of the hippocampus, and this is left hippocampus and this is right hippocampus. As I said, hippocampus is a biomarker of Alzheimer's disease, and it's also associated with episodic memory and working memory. So what you see here is at baseline, the two groups are nearly equal, which is a magic. We usually are not able to match people in brain structure or function. And so this is kind of more realistic picture, but there is slight difference, but they're not significantly different from each other. After 6 months, there is a slight trend that the aerobic fitness group, which is shown in blue, show an improved performance, improvement in hippocampus volume compared to the toning and stretching, which show their usual age-related decline. But this difference is not significant at 6 months, statistically significant. However, at 1 year, you see this increase is steady and monotonic. And at this point, the difference between the two groups is significant. So in other words, we needed 1 year of intervention to show that physical fitness training in terms of aerobic exercise is beneficial to older adults' brain volume. We couldn't have found these results if we had stopped the intervention at 6 months. The second thing I want to talk about is the impact on brain functions and cognition. And I'll go over this relatively quickly. So this is how we do fMRI studies. So you're in the scanner. And while you're in the scanner, you have a back projection camera on the screen where you can see a cognitive task and you have to perform that cognitive task. Your fingers are on button boxes with which you can respond to. And while you're doing cognitive tasks, we not only get the behavioral measures, but we also get brain signal changes while you're doing this task. So this is what functional MRI is. It's different from MRI, because MRI is you're just sitting in the scanner and we're looking at the structure of the brain. Functional MRI means while you are doing a task, we're seeing how your brain activity responds to the different challenges that we put you through in the task. So in this study, we looked at 2 different cardiovascular health measures, arterial plasticity and physical fitness, and its effect on executive functions and normal aging. And we wanted to see if the brain functions explain these relationships. So we wanted to look at both separate and combined effects of these 2 measures of cardiovascular risk factors on executive functions, and we used a multitasking paradigm. And again, emphasizing how many people we needed. We needed 60 healthy older adults and 28 younger adults. Usually studies on aging do not include younger adults when they're doing fitness interventions or asking questions about fitness or any other randomized control trial. It's very important to have younger adults because you don't know whether the changes in brain activation match that of the younger adults. And then we also had assessments of cardiovascular health. So just briefly, this is what the data looks like. So what we see is that low fit individuals activate this, frontal brain region that neither the high fit individual activate and neither the younger adults activate. In fact, I want to draw your attention to these 2 data points. The high fit and young adults look very similar to each other. So high fit older adults, who are 40 years on average older than the younger adults in our sample, have similar brain function and similar cognitive performance. However, it's the lower fit older adults who have worse cognitive performance and show this additional over-recruitment of the brain function. And the more you recruit, the worse your performance is. So I hear sounds in the background. So is my time up? Is that the reason?
No, okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
Let me, it's people. Let me mute everyone, and then, you can unmute yourself, please. Yes.
Sorry. So yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you, Nilanjana. So what I wanted to talk about is that you have this over recruitment of this brain region, and most of the time we think, oh, more you use the brain, it's good for you, right? But that's not true for older adults. Usually, many times they recruit additional regions of the brain, and it acts like a noise in the system. And so that's what we're seeing here. The more you recruit, the worse your performance is because they're slower in doing the task. Whereas high fit and younger adults are looking very same. So what it means is that if you have a long-term effect of physical fitness, not only your cognition is matching that of younger adults who are college sample, but you are also your brain is also behaving very similar to that of younger adults. And this is just to show in the very same region, we see that if you have one risk factor, such as either low fitness or high arterial stiffness, you do see, this brain region recruited more than if you have no risk factors. These are all older adults. And the older adults who have two risk factors, you can see there is this much higher recruitment of this maladaptive brain region compared to if you have just one risk factor. So this is one of the first few evidences where we show that multiple cardiovascular risk factors need to be studied together, not just fitness alone or arterial stiffness alone. Both of them combined together create a much bigger impact on healthy aging than if you have just one risk factor. All right. In addition to this, we can also look at protective effects on large-scale brain networks. So usually you look at resting states. So while people are resting, we look at these brain networks, and I won't go over the names for it, but these just look like pretty, images. This is very similar to the image that Dr. Ghosh had showed, where he was showing this, changes in brain network. We call them functional connectivity. That means how do these different brain regions talk to each other while they're just at rest. And at rest, you can see younger adults have much more functional connectivity than older adults. So these are the regions, mostly frontal and parietal regions, and some medial temporal regions of the brain, which includes hippocampus, which shows lesser connectivity in older than in younger adults. So what we also see is that you can do this analysis in a different way. So this is looking at all possible brain networks and younger and older adults. And you can see that older adults have much sparse representation, much less yellows than the younger adults who have much more yellows. Yellows are talking about how correlated these regions are. And so they have much sparse brain networks than younger adults. Older adults' brains looks like the yellow dots and the pink dots and the blue dots look more entangled with each other, whereas in younger adults, the yellow dots are one certain network and the blue dots are one certain network, and they're fairly far apart from each other. What is interesting is that in a study that is under review, we find that this kind of, within network connectivity in older adults, which is degrading in old compared to young during a task, not during a rest, is also related to your MOCA scores. So is also related to your pulse pressure. So the more network integrity you have, the lower arterial stiffness you have, and the more stiffened your arteries are, the worse your network, relationships are. So this is another way to think about the protective effects of, physical fitness on large-scale brain network. The final set of studies I just want to show is that there are also protective effects on cognitive training. So this is just a real-time strategy-based video game training. We did 2 different RCTs. This is an older RCT, which had 43 older adults and half in training and half in control group, where we found that in multitasking, the training group got faster in responding to the multitasking paradigm compared to the control group. And there were improvements in other domains as well.
Excuse me, আমার কথা কি শোনা যাচ্ছে? কেউ একজন কথা মানে মিউট করেননি? আমাদের কিন্তু খুব অসুবিধা হচ্ছে, হয় আমাদের কথা শুনুন আর নয় আপনি বেরিয়ে যান কাইন্ডলি। আমাদেরকে কাইন্ডলি ডিস্টার্ব করবেন না, এটা একটা ইম্পর্টেন্ট টক হচ্ছে। প্লিজ রেসপেক্ট দ্য স্পিকার। থ্যাংক ইউ সো মাচ। আই এম সরি ডক্টর বসা, প্লিজ।
No, that's okay. I just wanted to give the audience a little time to absorb as well. Our ETA, this one is a 20, this is a talk that this is a paper that we just submitted, which is a follow-up of this study where we have active control versus, the group that played this game training. And it's an off-the-shelf video game. It was bought for $5. It's a flop video game. It didn't even sell very well in the market, and we have no vested interest in it. We just bought it because my dad was one of the participants, and he played different types of video games. And he said, oh, this is the closest I can think in terms of strategy and planning that is involved in chess versus others, which were more point and shoot and kill your enemies, which he didn't like at all. So jokes apart, but what we see is that in older adults who do play this video game, in the multitasking paradigm, we also see increased activation in these dorsal frontal regions, which are responsible for multitasking. So it's not just in performance and cognition that we see improvements, we also see increased activations in these underlying brain regions. And so in this particular study, we needed 60 older adults, and this was a much older study, 2008, and so we could get away with 45 older adults. So again, this emphasis on we need participants to do these studies, because without these participants, to get 60 participants, I really have to screen 550 older adults to see how many of them are capable of getting into the MRI scan, have healthy cognition, have no signs of preclinical dementia, and then we do the study on them. And also are willing to do the time commitment required for these studies, because they take months to year to do these kind of interventions. And finally, I just want to emphasize that, all these studies are individual studies that I talked about, but many of us also do meta-analysis. So to understand if cognitive training is effective, it's not good to just look at one or two studies, because we could be biased in how we are presenting our results. Many times, journal publications only like results that are significant results, and they don't want to publish non-significant results. So therefore, it's very important to do what is called meta-analysis. And this is a recent meta-analysis we did in 2020, where we looked at all kinds of randomized control trials that did cognitive training in healthy older adults and an MCI. And just to let you know that when I did my initial search, I had about 30,000 papers that I had to read. After abstract selection, it dropped down to 231. Finally, in the analysis, I had 167 papers that I could include that fitted all the criteria that allowed me to look at. There are 118 studies on healthy aging and 49 studies on MCI. The bottom line is, collectively, both groups show improvements from cognitive training on overall cognition. And MCI group shows equal gains as healthy aging. So when we did the study, we thought maybe the healthy aging would benefit more than the MCI, because the rich gets richer, I have more, I have better cognition, maybe I would benefit more from it. But no, we actually see that the MCI group improves equally to the same degree as healthy aging. So that this kind of meta-analysis is very important, because more and more individual studies we have that allows us to look at the forest, not at individual trees. And that forest allows us to see, okay, which parts of the forests are green and which parts of the forests are dying and turning red. And these are the kind of studies, meta-analysis, needed for us to also develop individual trials. So we have a few clinical trials that are running in the lab, where we have then this very designed intervention, which we can only do because we did this meta-analysis that kind of showed us what kind of cognitive interventions were found to be the best from these meta-analysis. And now we are doing clinical trials to test those hypotheses driven by those meta-analysis. So I'll wrap up here, and thank you very much for your time. I just want to emphasize that research on cognitive neuroscience of aging and dementia integrates advanced statistics, advanced programming of experiments and analysis, psychology and neuroscience, but most importantly, it needs participants from all aspects of our society, including not only people who are suffering from dementia, but also relative healthy older adults, because the long phase of preclinical dementia lasts anywhere from 3 to 4 years, all the way till 20 years.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry for the noise out there. Well, you have a lot of questions, but we will take it at the end, if you don't mind. If we are already running late, so I will not waste much time and go to our next speaker for the evening. I'm inviting the much soft-spoken Professor Dr. Atanu Biswas from Department of Neurology, Institute of Postgraduate Medical Education and Research, and Bangur Institute of Neurosciences, Kolkata. Yet another personality who lets his work speak. Sir, we look forward to hearing your talk on the diagnostic challenges in the community around dementia.
Thank you very much for inviting me. First of all, I want to say a few words about the program. It was indeed a very great talk by Dr. Chandramallika Basak. We all learned about how to do this, carry out this sort of studies in our country, but we never attempted this. We will be great. It will be great if we can collaborate at some time, so that our healthy adults and the NCI gets benefited with the cognitive retraining and different types of exercises. Now, my talk is, let me just share my screen. My talk is actually based on the epidemiological works that we have done in our country, and maybe some of the things may be repetition of earlier speakers. What do we mean by the epidemiological indices? These are two indices that are mostly quoted. One is the prevalence and the incidence of a disease. For dementia, the prevalence means the number of persons with dementia in a community in a given period of time. It is expressed as number per 100,000 or number per 1,000 for dementia patients, or maybe in percentages. And incidence is the number of new people with dementia added to the community in a given time, particularly in a year. It is expressed as number of persons per thousands per year. So these two indices are mostly used in epidemiological perspective. And way back in 2012, our teacher, Professor Saman Kumar Das, did a review of all the epidemiological studies conducted in India, which showed a varied prevalence from South India to Eastern India, ranging from something like less than 1% above 60 years to almost 4% in some of the studies. Some of the studies are conducted way back in 1990s and somewhere in 2008 or so. So there was a wide variation because of the tools adopted, used, and the different locations also probably has led to different types of prevalence in this in India. So in 2021, another review article came up, which showed that the prevalence rate of different studies, there was 21 studies, and which quoted our study in 2003 to 2008, which we conducted in our city. But we also found a prevalence rate of something around 1.5 or 1.6 above 50 years of age. It was not very high. So this meta-analysis showed that there was 20 studies, total population of 86,000 around, and the prevalence rate is 20 per 1,000 persons. That means 2% of people above 50 years or 60 years. Some studies conducted of 60 years of age. There were equal prevalence of male and female, and age-specific prevalence. There was a rise of prevalence above 75 years. There was almost 8%. There was a rural-urban divide. Rural people had higher prevalence, like 3 per 1,000 as compared to 30 per 1,000 as compared to 20 per 1,000 of urban people. And this was what the table showed. But why this low prevalence in India? This is probably because some protective factor we are having, but some of the flaws lies in our assessment, probably because of the challenges in diagnosing them in the community. what are the challenges? Meera has already told that it's the lack of awareness about the dementia. People do not come forward with the memory complaint to the clinician. So they are usually not diagnosed at a proper time. So when they are coming to the clinic or the hospital, it is almost late. So a lack of awareness from the general people. Not only that, among the health professionals, the awareness is also very poor. This I'm telling you because we conducted a study long back, which was not a very large study, but we conducted with knowledge of dementia knowledge about dementia among doctors and nurses in a medical college hospital in India, in our state. We found that knowledge was not up to the mark, and almost 70 to 80% had some knowledge about the disease and the causation of the disease, but they do not have clear idea about the treatment modalities available, diagnostic facilities required, and almost 20% do not have the correct idea about the disease. So this is the scenario in our country. That's why many of these professionals, they are working in the hospitals, they are unable to pick up symptoms or diagnosis of a patient with dementia. Another important fallacies or the challenges is the lack of diagnostic tools. Unless we have a good tool to make a diagnosis, which is culturally adapted and validated to Indian languages and Indian scenarios, this attempt of making a diagnosis becomes almost is impossible. Some of the attempts were made by 2066 group, then the PGI and the Nieman's battery, and also in our group, Kolkata Cognitive Battery. But these were regional attempts and may not be applicable to all corners of the country. I'm telling you, there was an attempt to harmonize this battery in the Indian context in different languages and different cultures. While doing that, we found that in picture naming test, we had a very tough time to find out a particular picture of an animal, because some of the animals which are very common to southern parts may not be equally common to northern or the northeastern part. So rhinoceros is common to the Assamese, but it is not common to those who are living in Gujarat. So finding a pan-India tool is very difficult. Then the cutoff. Cutoff for age and education and gender-wise values for the scales is very important to pick up to make an early diagnosis, particularly those who are early dementia or, for that matter, the MCI. These are also, unfortunately, not available for Indian tools. Only few tools have attempted these. The Kolkata Cognitive Battery, we have some cutoff available for that. And another important aspect is the lower cutoff for the Indians. The cutoff for those the similar test for Western people may be higher than that of the Indian, because we have lack of exposure to the cognitive and neuropsychological test. Recently, however, there is a positive phenomena to this direction. The ICMR, Indian Council of Medical Research, have attempted to harmonize and make a India-specific neurocognitive toolbox, and that was developed by a group of neurologists and psychiatrists and psychologists in this country. That is a very good attempt towards making an Indianized tool. I think that has been standardized and that has been validated and published in a number of times. This will be available for all of us in multiple Indian languages, and it will be available free of cost. It will be available in public domain. Another problem we have is the illiteracy. And because of the low literacy, because of lack of exposure to the literacy, that makes a person very difficult to assess, because unless we have an illiterate battery, the same battery which is used for the literate subject cannot be used for the illiterate one. So that is one hindrance for us. And probably this ICMR neurocognitive toolbox is also going to be made available for the illiterate subjects. Another is that because of the low exposure, and many learning disabilities or those who are mentally retarded, they are mixed with the illiterate or poorly literate subjects, so making a diagnosis of dementia difficult for them. This is another important aspect for us because many elderly subjects in India and community, particularly the family, they are not challenged to know the disability because they're not allowed to go to the shopping or to do the financial transaction or driving. So they are usually not, the activities of daily living is not considered to be affected because they're not challenged. So it is very difficult. If you go to any family while doing the community studies, the older person, he is fine. But if you probe whether he goes for shopping, he goes for a walk or for banking related work, no, he is an elderly person, he is not allowed to. So that he is not challenged. But if you test him, you find that he is suffering from dementia. That is a very important aspect in our community. And of course, there is a lack of healthcare services in the rural areas. The government health system is overburdened with the other diseases, so they are not concerned about the dementia or the geriatric health problems. And of course, the government is not having the priority to this non-communicable diseases. As of now, there is no strategy for dealing with these patients, elderly patients with non-communicable diseases, neurodegenerative diseases. So this is not actually the number. The burden is not the number only. Knowing the number of people with dementia in countries is 38 lakhs or so. It's not going to help you unless you understand what is the impact of this number. So impact, there are some epidemiological indices. This is called the years of life lost due to the disease. There are many diseases which takes your life, like the cancers. So if a person gets cancer at the age of 50 years and he dies at the age of 55 years, you know that the person was supposed to live to, if he did not have the cancer, up to a fullest extent, up to 75 years. So he lost his 20 years of life. So that is because of the disease, he lost 20 years of his life. So this is the years lost due to the disease. Similarly, some diseases which do not take the life of the person, but they make the person disabled, like the chronic illnesses like migraine. All of us, many of us are suffering from migraine. We know that sometimes it is very difficult to work, so that makes you disabled for that day. So similarly, the Alzheimer's disease also takes away the part of your life with disability. So years of life lived with disability is another indices. So when we combine this together, it's called the disability adjusted life year. That is very important parameter to know how much part of the life the persons lived with disability. So to know that, this is a landmark study which was published recently in the Lancet Neurology, the Lancet Global Public Health Journal. In this, I was one of the collaborators. They looked into the burden of the neurological diseases across the states in India. So the burden has probably increased because of the number of elderly people has increased from 1991 to 2019. So this is one of the factors. And also there was a rural urban, both areas, the number of persons, elderly persons was increased. So we found that of the neurological diseases, the stroke probably contributed significantly to the DALY, or the disability adjusted life years, significantly, because stroke is probably the major cause of the disease mortality as well as morbidity of all the neurological disorders. But after the stroke, other diseases, the migraine and epilepsy, the Alzheimer's disease also come into contributing the significant number, 4 to 6% of DALY. So of the non-communicable diseases, these states, West Bengal is also faring in the contributing the much amount of DALY, non-communicable diseases. along with the Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Kerala. Whereas the communicable diseases like the tetanus or the meningitis or encephalitis, these are more common in the Bimaru state, the Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Gujarat, and Madhya Pradesh, like that. So what are the numbers of dementia persons having at the moment in the country in 2019? It is probably a 36 or 37 lakh people total in male, women, female suffers more than the men. But what is the future projection? This is another study which is going to be published in this year. The estimation of the global prevalence of dementia from 1990 to 2019 and the forecasted prevalence through 2050. So it is said that by 2050, the globally forecasted is that there will be a age-specific rise in prevalence rate, both in men and as well as female. And India will have almost 197% increase in the number of cases of dementia to more than 1.15 crore people of dementia will live in this country in 2050. This is the prediction. And probably all South Asian countries will have an increased number of the similar tune from varying from 160 to 200 or 300%, depending upon the countries. And India and China both will contribute significantly to the number of dementia in total world population, varying from 180 to 200% rise from now to 2050. Whereas the African countries there will be significant rise in the number of cases because of the significant jump, more than 300% of cases. Why this is? This is because primarily due to the change in the population growth. In South Asia, there will be a significant number of population growth will be happening till 2050. And also there is a change in the prevalence rate and of course, the change in the population aging. So the population aging will also contribute to this significant increase in the number of dementia subjects in 2050 in our country. Now, something about the economic burden. If we do not consider the financial burden, the burden will not be judged properly. I probably had spoken about this earlier also. I am giving two examples. Both of them are very close to my family. This is an engineer who diagnosed as Parkinson's disease in 1992, and I saw him when he was almost demented in 2005 and thereafter. His wife was my passmate and he went to England for further studies. So he was looked after, this patient was looked after by his daughter, who widowed early. His wife was also a diabetic and hypertensive and developed dementia in after 2010 or something. So most of the burden was taken up care by her daughter and their daughter, and of course by Aya and maid servants. Financial support was provided by his son. The lady needed repeated hospitalization for a number of occasions during her terminal days with infection, with hyponatremia, with some other thing. And 2018, both died within a period of 4 months. So there was a long suffering, prolonged suffering, and the patients was cared at home, sometimes needed hospitalization. This is what is the story of the modern urban India, where the people are living with dementia in this country and the children are living abroad. This highlights that the lack of healthcare facilities for the elderly, and more so for those who are suffering from dementia, because our healthcare system, the hospitals, both government and the private, they are not equipped to deal with the problems of the dementia sufferer. And there is also a demand for other diseases, so they are not getting the priority. The rising cost of healthcare in this country in face of diminished income for the elderly is another important point. And lack of support of the health insurance companies to help these chronic illnesses like dementia. That is also a very major concern for Indian patients. Another scenario, he's also a close person. When I joined a government undertaking, NTPC, I found this person was a very young, kind-hearted gentleman who had 2 daughters. In 2010, I came to know that he developed behavioral abnormality, become hyper-religious, having difficulty in decision-making, inability to complete a task given to him. So he was diagnosed as early onset dementia. Probably he was having a frontotemporal dementia type. And the company allowed his wife to assist him in doing some clerical work in the front desk of laboratory. He was a laboratory assistant. His daughter were yet to complete their studies. They did not have their home for their own. So everything got jeopardized. In 2014, when we met, he could not identify us. He could identify us, but thought that we are still their neighbor. So the problem is he could not do anything for his daughter's marriage. In 2019, he became more aggressive. It was difficult for his wife to continue to stay in a remote place. So she moved to Calcutta. The issues for young onset dementia is the difficulties in diagnosis. Most of the time, they are not brought to the doctors because of the behavioral changes, are thought to be because of something else, and they are not reluctant to come to the doctor. This happened and sometimes led to the divorce in many of the cases. These young persons are sole bread earners, so they loss of wages leads to economic loss to the family. Financial liabilities, they usually have their children who are still have not completed their education, they're dependent old parents, they usually have loan, mortgages, and behavior is socially embarrassing, and also they are having physical power, so difficult to provide care to them is also there. The cost of care for dementia, there are many aspects of this. Direct cost leading to diagnostic tests, medicine, consultation fees, transportation cost, cost of professional care, nursing professional, everything come to the direct cost, but indirect cost is high. Loss of work and wages of the family members, loss of leisure time and of the family, and of course intangible cost, alteration in the quality of life of the sufferer and their carer. This has never been looked into in our country, and measuring the cost of care is difficult due to variation in India because of the variation in the professional carer versus the home care, institutional care. Cost in the rural and urban areas are different. Cost in private and government healthcare is different, and there are also regional variations. And there is no study in India to look into the cost of care for this dementia. According to WHO report, the total worldwide estimated dementia cost will be $18 million, and equivalent to 1.1% of GDP in 2015. And of this, 0.2% in the low middle income countries and 1.4% in the high income countries. So there is a marked divide between the low and high income countries. The resources are most of the time are spent for these costs is in the high income countries, although they have a lower prevalence than the lower income countries. So to conclude, we are in the middle of an epidemic which is predicted to increase manifold in the near future, and the overall burden due to the sufferings is huge and going to increase further. The cost of care for dementia is not known exactly in India. This is just to remind all of us about our responsibility for making this country prepared for the future burden. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bishash. Thank you so much. We will come back to you with questions later. We will invite our last speaker for the evening, Dr. Nishi Pulugurtha, who is the Associate Professor of English from Brahmanando KC College, Kolkata. Here is a friend in need for every occasion that rises, from helping us arrange awareness of dementia to trial runs of how to go live on FB. I must inform you all that a very recent awareness arranged through Nishi saw 600 plus college students from rural Bengal join us to be dementia literate. So thank you, Nishi, for all that you do for us. And you are always someone that we can connect without much fuss. So let's hear from you the essence of what dementia should be all about. Thank you so much, Nishi.
Thank you so much, Nilanjana. I was listening to most of the conversations, most of the talks throughout the evening. And I did find a lot of resonances with what I have gone through in caring for my mother. And I would like to begin with what DY noted. I found that phrase very interesting. She said that dementia is an invisible disability. And I think that is precisely how, exactly how one could describe it. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and when I started talking about it, I actually started first writing about it. I began to write about my personal experiences of caring for my mother, and then later on, I began to talk about it as well. And one thing that I noticed is that we do not talk about it, because when I started writing and when I started sharing my essays on social media, I found various people reaching out to me and telling me that, you know, somebody in their family had it. And that is when I realized that it is so much a common part of our lives, yet we do not speak about it. And this, I think, it has something in common with every other kind of mental health issue, where we relegate them to the background. We do not talk about them. I mean, if we had a physical ailment, you know, a diabetes or maybe pressure or thyroid, you know, we would be talking about it, you know, making that a very big issue. But I find we don't talk about this at all. More so if it is dementia, because I think that we kind of, I mean, Dr. Bishash also was speaking, and other people before me also spoke about, we do not speak about the geriatric population. So once they have retired, once they have kind of served their purpose, they move into the background. And this is what I have felt, you know, over these years. So I think, and I really very much like the theme of this year's Alzheimer's month, no dementia, no Alzheimer's. And when I began talking, as I said, I had people sharing their stories with me. I also had people asking me what they should do. You know, somebody in their home had certain symptoms or was showing certain symptoms and what they should do. So I think that is one thing, that is one area which I would like to emphasize when I begin about this idea of the invisible disability. I think it's very important to engage with it at various levels, talk about it, you know, discuss it. And of course, when everybody has been talking about the early symptoms, and again here, you know, Diva did say that in the case of her mother, she has not been able to notice the early symptoms. And I think that is something that each of us who have cared for someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's have missed the initial symptoms. I think now when I look back, and now when I have been talking about this for such a long time, and hearing so much about this, reading so much about this for a very long period, I feel that when someone is in the midst of it all, that thin line, you know, I think there are small little thin lines which make us confused, which make it difficult for us to understand, you know, when I need to go to take my mother to a doctor, and when it's all right. So I think that is a very big issue. When I look back right now, I feel that because my mother had this habit of repeating things. And, you know, the moment now, if I hear someone is repeating, I will immediately tell that person, no, just see a doctor or get in touch with Nilanjana first. But at that point of time, I did not realize that this is something which is a kind of an indication that she might be having dementia or Alzheimer's. I knew what Alzheimer's was at that point of time. Of course, my knowledge of Alzheimer's at that point of time and my knowledge of it today are very drastically different. At that point of time, for me, Alzheimer's meant something to do with memory, just the loss of memory and nothing else. I feel when I look back, you know, these are small little things which I might have overlooked, as many of us who have cared for our loved ones have overlooked. And it took a very big incident in my family to find out that my mother had dementia, right? She walked out of the house and for 48 hours, we didn't find her. I was lucky that we found her back. And that is when, and I find it very strange because even the day before, just the day before, the day she locked the house exactly as she would when she would be going out. And this is something which was very common. My mother did this very normally. You know, she went out on her own for various errands to do a lot of things. And I find it very strange. This happened, a day after, just the day before this, you know, she did all her, whatever she used to do, including buying groceries, going to the bank. So there was nothing at that point of time which told me that she could, you know, do something like this or something like this could happen. So that is one thing which I think I need to emphasize, and every one of us who are caring for our loved ones have seen these changes. But I keep telling everybody, because the moment someone comes and tells me that something like this has happened, where they're repeating, you know, once or twice, even I repeat. I'm a teacher, so I have this habit of repeating because I need to make sure my students, you know, listen to everything. Is kind of ingrained into their head. But now when someone comes and tells me, I'm able to kind of, you know, maybe catch those subtle changes which one notices. I also remember when I first took my mother to a psychiatrist, who then recommended that I need to see Dr. Ghosh, the neurologist. Dr. Ghosh was my mother's, he's the one who diagnosed my mother at that point of time. And I remember one thing, both the psychiatrist and both Dr. Ghosh had asked me to get in touch with Nilanjana Maulik. Not only that, you know, at the point of time where when I was looking for my mother, I reached out to a number of people. I emailed a number of people and used social media, sending her photographs. Apart from these two medical professionals, I also had a number of other people tell me that they knew someone called Nilanjana Maulik who works in the area. And I did get in touch with Nilanjana after the diagnosis came in. I got in touch with her, and I have always been in touch with her because when the diagnosis came in, I must say it was a kind of a shock, you know. Though I did not know the real ramifications of the disease, what it all entails, I did not know at that point of time. I really did not know that this journey would be so much more difficult than what I had imagined at that point of time. So for me, at that point of time, this was a disease that my mother was diagnosed with, a disease where she would be forgetting things. That was all I knew about Alzheimer's. But then as I began to care for her, as I began to read up, as I began to know from Nilanjana, I saw that there was much more to it than just memory and the loss of it. And it is these behavioral problems which became very, very difficult for the initial few months, or at least the initial few years. The behavioral problems were extremely difficult to deal with. I mean, this is something that I always say, and I think each of us who have been dealing with this know how difficult it is, where, you know, there's no way one can be prepared, and there's no, I mean, one really does not know how to react or how not to lose one's cool, how to maintain one's temper when one is doing that. So I do realize that these behavioral issues at that point were very, very crucial for me. I mean, it was very, very difficult at that point of time. One example I could give is that, you know, my mother had this wandering tendency, so we had to keep the house under lock and key, and we had to keep the keys away from my mother. And she would spend quite a bit of her time looking for those keys. She even got angry that the ayah in the house had the keys to the house, to her house. And this is the first time that I had help at home. I had the ayah at home, something my mother did not like. I mean, she would talk to the ayah and all of that was there, but she did not like this person looking over her. She always felt that this person, this outsider, was keeping an eye on her, was, you know, she was under constant surveillance. She did not like it at all. And there were times when she locked the ayah out of the house as well. And for me, this was a big shocked because my mother is a very friendly kind of, a very gentle kind of a person. So when I heard that this was how she behaved with this ayah, it took me some time, quite some time, to realize why these changes were coming about in her. She had a lot of hallucinations. Of course, about the hallucinations, I had been told by Dr. Ghosh. So I knew that there would be hallucination, but I did not know the nature of the hallucination, or should I say, the magnitude of the hallucinations. They were huge, and they used to come at random points of time I was completely taken aback by all of this. As Dr. Bishas was saying, that we don't allow the older people to do certain things. This thing suddenly came into my mind. My mother was someone who she enjoyed doing all of this, bank transactions and everything, and going to the bazaar, buying vegetables, or doing grocery shopping, or any other need, she would do it. And once the diagnosis came in, I had to kind of combine a practical necessity of, I knew that I had to take her out. I knew that I had to make things as much as it was for her, just the way it was for her, just the way that she would like. But at the same point of time, I also had to be very, very careful when I took her out. So I had to stop her going out to the bazaar or going out to the bank. And I made it a point to take her out once in a while, but it was very difficult for me taking her out, particularly in crowded places. So I began to look for places which were enclosed and where we had much less crowds, because in that space, I would be able to, look after her, safeguard her, because she had this ability to just make a move within a matter of seconds, and so quietly that even if the person was standing beside her, he or she would not have understood that she's just moved away. So I had to do all of this. I need to tell you that I even traveled with my mother after the diagnosis came in, after the diagnosis of Alzheimer's came in, but just once by train and then by flight for practical reasons. And during these journeys, I had to be very, very careful with her. So as long as she could, as long as it was possible to take her, I did it. But then at one point of time, I couldn't. So I had to make these changes in her life. And as every caregiver knows, these changes affect everyone else, in particular the primary caregiver who is looking after the loved one. Someone was mentioning about the lack of awareness among doctors and healthcare professionals. And this is something which I have encountered as well. I mean, I have encountered doctors who knew the whole situation, who knew me, of course, and knew my mother's condition. For instance, Nilanjana had told me a few months into the diagnosis that I needed to get my mother's eyes tested. And I had asked her why. She had just told me that, since she's aging, so she might have problems with her eyesight, which could cause her problems. And I remember taking my mother to the eye doctors who were my friends, much senior friends, and they had diagnosed the beginnings of a cataract. And since both of them knew her condition, they had told me that in case of other patients, they would have waited for another year. But knowing my mother's condition, they told me not to wait for more than 6 months to get it done, because since this would progress even further, it would have become even more difficult for me. And I remember after the eye operation, there was just a small little bandage on one eye. And in the morning when I got up, I saw my mother had removed that bandage as well. And I was scared at that point of time. I thought, what did she do to her eye? I mean, did she put her hand in or something? I was absolutely scared. While I had good experiences with these doctors, I had very poor experiences with a dental professional. I took my mother to when one of her, tooth broke off. So I had to take her. It was her birthday and the tooth broke off, and she came and showed me that her tooth had broken off. So when I took her to the dentist, and I told him that my mother has Alzheimer's, so she will not be following your instructions perfectly. This gentleman completely ignored whatever I had to say, took her in and could not handle her. And he was getting angry with her. And it's difficult to anger my mother, of course. I mean, she would take a lot of time to get angry with the gentleman. So which is when I had to move in, though he was angry with me, I had to move in to tell him that, I need to give her the instructions, which then she would follow. So I had to kind of intervene in these instances. And this is something I think many of us who are dealing with our loved ones who have Alzheimer's or dementia have at some point or the other faced. So there have been innumerable such challenges all throughout. I could go on and on forever, but I think now when people reach out to me, I always tell them if they think that something is wrong, then to get in touch. I mean, I have sent innumerable people to Nilanjana who, after listening to them, has told them not to worry also, or to see a doctor, a neurologist or whatever. But the moment I have come across any such instances, anything which disturbs you, anything which you think is not normal, is an aberration from the normal, I always tell people to go ahead and see a medical professional, somebody who understands the condition, and somebody who is compassionate towards the whole issue, and not just any doctor who might overlook, or maybe a geriatric practitioner as well. So as I look back, as I think, if I could have noticed the initial signs, then possibly things could have been different. But I do know that, I'm glad that the diagnosis came at the point of time that it came. And I have, as I said, tried my level best to see that given the kind of precautions that I need to take, somehow or the other, I was able to make her, continue the kind of life that she was used to. Of course, I had to bring in a number of changes, in particular, changes to do with supervision. I really have found each and every change that came about her, whether it had to do with changes in food, changes in feeding, changes in language, because my mother was fluent in English, Bangla, Hindi, and Telugu, which was her mother tongue. But then after some years, I noticed that she would move from Bangla or English into Telugu without even realizing that people around her did not understand the language, and she would continue that conversation. There was a time when whatever be the language you spoke to her, she replied in Telugu. She replied correctly, but she was always replying in Telugu. And she was someone who talked a lot. She could talk and talk. I mean, she loved talking to anybody and everybody. But slowly over a period of time, this talking reduced. She was kind of retreating into her shell, I feel. And there were times when even to call out to me, instead of calling my name, she would just clap to draw out my attention. And then over a period of time, she became completely quiet. And that gave rise to many more new problems, because I didn't know whether she was sick or whether something was troubling her. So that became a major issue as well. So almost in every sphere of life, whether it was to do with her clothing, with incontinence, with language, with these attempts to wander off, she always was looking for this to go out, whether it is to do with the eating habits, there was a drastic change in her eating habits, where she stopped to eat and had to be fed as well. And whether it had to do with language, these changes, as and when they came, I mean, they did not come all of a sudden, but as they began to come, they brought in a fresh set of challenges that I had to learn to deal with. And, as I keep saying, I don't think there is any way in which one could be prepared for that, no matter how much one, reads or knows about the condition. I think I'll stop here, and maybe if there are questions, I could take them up. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishi. Thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. I think it is important for all of us to hear these experiences because yes, diagnosis is important. Yes, understanding the medical perspective is important, but at the end of the day, it's the caregivers who are dealing with the real situation day in and day out. And it's important that we hear them, hear their voices, because they are the real, that's the real feedback we get. So thank you. And I believe it was an excellent session, all the speakers. What I'm going to do right now is play the game a bit different. I will finish the ritual, which is, of course, the vote of thanks, because we need to record, our thanks. And then what we will do is, take questions, and people can stay as much, longer as they want, and get their questions answered. So I will now invite our executive board member, Mrs. Jyoti Sethi, to deliver the vote of thanks. Ms. Sethi, if you could kindly do the honor.
Namaskar. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We just heard our distinguished eminent speakers on the theme for September 2021 World Alzheimer's Month campaign. No dementia, no Alzheimer's. It appears we have just touched upon the iceberg. The tunnel ahead is long, and there is a lot of work which needs to be done to brighten the world of our loved ones and of the caregivers. Also indicated were the checkered paths to cover, one of them being stigma. This takes me to the quote of Mother Teresa, the saint who devoted her life for the care of the suffering. I had read of this quote much before I was introduced to the world of Alzheimer's. If your eyes are positive, you will love the world. But if your tongue is positive, then the world loves you. A thumb rule for a caregiver. On behalf of the governing body of the Calcutta chapter of Alzheimer's and Related Disorders Society of India, ARDSI, I take the privilege of conveying our appreciation and thank you to each of the viewers on the show for their participation. We do value your time and support in building empathy and support of belonging. Our thanks to the eminent distinguished speakers for enlightening us on the subject and for the journey that lies ahead. Dr. Amitabh Ghosh, President ARDSI, Calcutta Chapter, D.Y. Soharia, Regional Director, Asia Pacific, Alzheimer's Disease International, Ms. Meera Pachabirman, Chairperson, ARDSI National, Dr. Chandra Malika Basak, Associate Professor, the Center for Vital Longevity, School of Behavior and Brain Sciences, University of Texas, Dallas, United States of America, Professor Dr. Atanu Biswas, Department of Neurology, Institute of Postgraduate Medical Education and Research, and Bangur Institute of Neurosciences, Kolkata, India. Dr. Nishi Pulugurtha, Associate Professor of English, Brahmananda K.C. College, Kolkata, India. We are grateful to Alcam Laboratories Limited, the Pentacare Division, for financial support to conduct the seminar. Greatly appreciated. Many thanks to the media for the coverage and support in the awareness campaign. We are thankful for everything you bring on the table in support. Last but not the least, a standing ovation for each and every member that is included in the administrative body of ARDSI Kolkata chapter, led by Mrs. Nilanjana Malik, for the efforts and hard work contributed in preparation in the program today, and for conducting daily awareness webinars to observe the World Alzheimer's Month. Nilanjana Malik is the Secretary, Calcutta Chapter, and National Coordinator, Working Group, ARDSI National. Before we draw the curtains to the program of the day, sorry, we have the question and answer still coming. We would like to convey our gratitude to Kolkata Port Trust to consider to eliminate the Howrah Bridge from dusk to dawn in the official blue color of ARDSI Kolkata to observe the World Alzheimer's Day on Tuesday, 21st September. For those of you on the show are in Calcutta, come and honor the cherished memories of people living with dementia. Take a picture or a video of the Howrah Bridge in blue color and post it on your social media page. Thank you from the core of our hearts. Thank you very much. Namaskar. Good night.
Thank you. And thank you for waiting all this time with someone at your back. Must be hungry for dinner. So,
that's the life we are in. That's okay.
Yes. And what a great life, trying to balance everything. So
the advantages of COVID. Everybody's been talking about the disadvantages. I'll talk of it as an advantage. I have all the time for him.
True. Wonderful. You be blessed and take good care of yourself.
Thank you.
Yes. So what I'm going to do now is take some questions from the audience. We already have in the chat box. One of them is for Dr. Ghosh, if you are there. Is Alzheimer's disease genetic?
Well, I think Dr. Borshak has, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Am I audible? Yeah. So I think just been touched upon by Dr. Borshak in some way.
Okay.
Now, most of the Alzheimer's disease that we see around us is non-genetic, it's sporadic. Genetic Alzheimer's disease, as in inherited from generation to generation, is very, very small. It's kind of, it's less than 5%, probably around 2 or 3%. And there are certain genes, let's not go into those names, but they are transmitted in an autosomal dominant fashion. Someone did ask that question. Now, the other gene that Dr. Borshak had referred to is very important. It's the ApoE4 gene. Now, in that applies to sporadic Alzheimer's disease. And if you have a tendency to have sporadic Alzheimer's disease sometime in your life, and you have this ApoE4 gene, especially the E4 alleles, there are different things. You know, the alleles are these two little foci in the genes, which we call alleles, just for people who don't know about genetics. And if you have this particular thing in the focus, then you have a higher chance of developing Alzheimer's disease quicker. So ApoE4 is very important in sporadic Alzheimer's disease. It is not used for, it's not for kind of, parent to children transmission thing, but it is a gene which modifies negatively your chance of developing Alzheimer's disease quicker. So that is the genetic relation of Alzheimer's disease. There are many, many other modified genes. We won't go into that, but these are the common ones you probably know and read of.
Okay.
And let me tell you, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Let me tell you, all throughout today, most of the discussions we had was on Alzheimer's disease, which is the prototypical dementia that we have. There are various other dementias which are misidentified as Alzheimer's disease when they are not. For example, frontotemporal dementia is one example, where it's much stronger genetic links and they're different genes, but that's another story.
There's a question for you, Dr. Ghosh. Any chance we can get a consultation session or opportunity to chat with Dr. Ghosh, please?
Yeah, anytime. You're very welcome.
Okay, so I'm going to, allow me to share your contact with the person. And your next question, sorry?
I didn't read the question, otherwise I would have put the number of that. But yeah, you can.
It just got posted right now. The next one is, can you help us connect with Mumbai unit of ARDSI? Yes, I will for sure. I will do that. Rest of the questions were for Dr. Bosak. Mainly people were interested to know about the computer games and, how to go about doing it. Mentioning that people, especially in India, do not have access to computer games. Not many have computers. So how do we, try and think of different ways of intervention? So I think you have mostly answered them. There is another question that has come up. Can COVID-19 infection itself cause dementia or dementia-like conditions at a younger age than usual? Yeah, that's the first part of the question.
It seems it's for me, so I'll try to answer that. That's very interesting question. So as we learn about COVID-19 and the brain, and every day is a new learning day, I promise you. But yes, you see, two things which COVID-19 does to the brain, among many others that we are learning, are immune-mediated damage to the brain. And there are many diseases which are triggered off by COVID-19 in the brain as well as in the peripheral nerves. And the second thing, of course, is it is a disease where there are clots forming in the blood vessels of the brain, right? So you have these tiny strokes inside the brain, if you may, because of COVID-19, clot forming disease. And therefore, the blood supply, Dr. Bosak spent a long part of the research discussing blood vessels and thickening of the blood vessels and the brain and dementia. So if the blood vessels are damaged, then clearly your hippocampus and other parts of the brain also depend on blood supply and oxygen for their food and living. And therefore, naturally, they are damaged as well. So if you have a COVID-19 infection, which is directly affecting your brain, you can very well have a damage, you can very well have a problem with your memory and your cognition. Whether that amounts to dementia or not is a different story, because sometimes it produces an entity called autoimmune encephalitis, which potentially is treatable, and you may not end up having dementia. But I personally have a patient who has just been discharged today, who had Alzheimer's disease, had COVID-19, and had been very stable for the last 2.5 years. And there was a rapid decline to the extent that I had to look for autoimmune tests to see whether something else was contributing or whether it's just Alzheimer's disease. The brain MRI didn't show anything interesting other than the shrinkage of the brain. So yes, it does. If you have a tendency to have Alzheimer's disease, it can worsen. Otherwise, it can produce problems in the brain which at least can mimic dementia. And yes, it can come earlier. It's a long answer to a short question, but I hope.
Okay, so there is another part of the question from Dr. Aditya. I will try my best. This is not in my dictionary, my caregiver dictionary, but I will try and pronounce it correctly.
I can read that.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
I think I got the question. Does oligodendrocytes in our brain play a role in pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease? Very nice question, Dr. Aditya, because in fact, recent understanding of the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease, and indeed many other degenerative diseases in the brain, suggests that it probably starts from oligodendrocytes even before there is deposition of these bad proteins in the brain. I was talking to you about. Oligodendrocytes for the non-medical listeners here, it's a long name to type of cells which produce a insulated covering of these neurons inside the brain, right? So they insulate the brain, and that covering is called myelin. And oligodendrocytes produce this myelin. And what happens is when the myelin is damaged in any, suppose I damage the brain today from this encephalitis I was talking about, the myelin gets damaged first. And when the myelin gets damaged, there are cells which produce these oligodendrocytes. They quickly come to the damaged area and they start producing myelin again. And healthy myelin is produced and quickly the recovery takes place. It is only when this balance of damage to the myelin versus the recovering changes, then you have disease. But the problem with aging and in diseases like Alzheimer's disease and other dementias is while the damage is taking place slowly and surely, there is also damage to the oligodendrocyte producing cells. They're called precursor cells. Basically, they're oligodendrocyte producing cells. They are also weak, poor health, and they're damaged by the same disease, which is neurodegeneration. And therefore, they cannot produce healthy myelin, to cut a very long story short. And therefore, the myelin is never produced back in a healthy way. The brain continues to have problems with these neuron structures. So they disintegrate and they cannot pass the signals. They cannot pass even the food to the areas called synapses, which connect to each other and so on. So, and therefore, there's a progressive breakdown. So the oligodendrocytes are some of the very important things in any neurodegenerative disease and in many other diseases. And whether, I think the last part of the question is whether we can do anything about it. Well, it's kind of research is in infancy, if you may, where these cells which produce the healthy oligodendrocytes, people are trying to work on these cells and prevent their damage. But it's very early. It's fundamental research in the bench. So that's another discussion altogether. But it's a very potential area for a lot of things. And that has been worked on in cancers, by the way. In brain cancers, I think some work has been done on that, but I'm not very sure.
Yes,
yeah,
Dr.
Mosha.
I just wanted to supplement what Dr. Ghosh said. So indeed, this research is mostly in the rodent population and the bench, but in humans, we see with interventions such as, I know that we have evidence from aerobic fitness intervention, as well as the 2 new clinical trials that we just completed. One of my students just finished his dissertation, so we're just writing it out. It's on 240 older adults, multi-site study, and we found increases in white matter connectivity, which is these tracks, these white matter tracks, and the better tracks you have are in humans supposed to be indicative of this myelination, right? So this channeling that Dr. Ghosh was talking about, and we see these maintenance of these white matter tracks in strategy gamers versus the ones who are playing a different type of video game, an active control, and the same pattern we find with physical fitness. There have been juggling training done in Germany early on in 2003 or 5, where they found that juggling can help with increasing white matter tracks, and medical students also, they did studies on that. So there have been some human studies. We don't know exactly what is the chemical composition of it, but we can at least look at the diffusion tensor imaging and look at the tracks and see if these interventions can help maintain it over a period of time.
Mm-hmm. There's another question from Shuchishmita Chakraborty. If you, Dr. Bishash, Dr. Ghosh, if you, or Dr. Boshak, are the chances of developing dementia high in patients with autoimmune disease such as IBD-related arthritis and the medications they are put on, with which is often, yeah. So you want to address that question? Can you see that question?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Dr. Bishash, yeah.
Yes, as Dr. Amitabh Ghosh has already told, that inflammation plays an important role in neurodegenerative diseases as well. And in COVID-19 probably is also an infection which incites inflammation in the brain. And that we also think that this inflammation will sometime lead to neurodegeneration. And this has also been proved in some of the studies which have shown that there is a loss of brain volume, the gray matter volume, before what was there before the infection and after 6 months after the infection of the COVID-19. So with that, think keeping in mind that inflammatory condition anywhere in the body and incite the various cytokines, and that can also affect the brains. But I have no idea about any studies which have looked into the inflammatory bowel disease leading to neurodegenerative diseases. But probably in a argument's sake, this has an effect on the chronic neurodegeneration, as the inflammation plays an important role, and probably many inflammatory diseases can incite inflammation in the brain itself and can produce cognitive impairment. But I do not have any clear idea about the prevalence of cognitive impairment or dementia or Alzheimer's disease in those who are having this inflammatory bowel disease or some other inflammatory conditions in the body. I think Dr. Ghosh might highlight something more.
Yes, it may all probably all to do with the gut-brain axis. But yes, there is a higher chance of patients with inflammatory bowel disease having dementia. I think there are works on that, and I think, as I said, I mean, I can't quote exact literature for that at the moment, but it is true that there is an increase. As far as other inflammatory diseases elsewhere, all of them may not necessarily be, for example, I can't think of rheumatoid arthritis being directly related with dementia. But for bowel, yes, there is an increased risk.
Okay. Any more questions? Somebody would like to unmute and ask, or put it up in the chat box. It's almost 3 hours we are into it. And I'm just surprised and really impressed with more than 40 people still. We almost touched 100 people, and still now after 3 hours we are 40 more people. And I really want to thank all of you for showing your interest and participating in this.
Well, can I have a question?
Yes, please.
Yes. Yeah, to Dr. Basak, will you give us some elaboration of any of your results pertaining to sex difference or ethnic difference in your study results?
Thank you for asking that question. I hate to look at sex differences. I'm forced to look at it now because National Institute of Health forces us to look at it. Usually I covary out gender in my model, and we usually are, sadly, 90% of our participants are mostly white Americans, because the people who come to the lab are usually high SES, highly educated. And this is something that I'm sure people in India also find. It's very difficult to reach out to a broader audience in spite of all these outreach programs. I'm luckily in Dallas, where we have a lot of Hispanic low-income group as well. So we are able to get that population, and then we get a lot of Asians, but we don't get African Americans as much in Dallas. And I really have no data on Native Americans. So I don't have enough power to look at ethnicity differences, so we covary that thing out from the model because we don't have ethnicity difference. We do have data on rural versus urban populations and high education versus low education. And in the meta-analysis that I talked to you about, where we looked at 30,000 studies before, looking at 114 studies to look at the effects of cognitive training on cognitive gains, we found that the studies which had lower education and where individuals were on average less educated showed greater benefits from cognitive training. And that was surprising, because I usually go into the research thinking rich gets richer, right? Like, you have a lot of frontoparietal brain structure that's good for you, you learn better, you transfer more. And this is the first evidence where we see that people with lower cognitive reserve show greater benefits from cognitive training. That means the pre-post gains and those groups in those individuals were greater. And so now this is a large scale meta-analysis. It should be followed up with more individual studies. However, this shows promise of cognitive training. So we think that this also shows transfer. So we also see that in MCI. MCI individuals show greater benefits from cognitive training on average than the healthy aging. Again, with this idea that if you have less, then there is more room for plasticity. And maybe that's why the cognitive training are turning out to be more beneficial. So we have evidence for SCS and education because they're both linked. In terms of gender, the only study I can think about where we found gender differences were strategy game training versus the first-person shooter game training. So we wanted to see if there is a gender difference between, and this is just younger adults, whether they prefer to play one game versus another. And we found that there was a gender difference in first-person shooter game training, which is very popular with younger adults. I'm sadly not young anymore, so I don't like, shooting people, even in a virtual environment. But with strategy game training, like the thing I said in the chat, like cooking, sushi go around, driving while you're multitasking, those kind of games, we find that there is no gender difference in preference of the game. And we also don't find gender playing a role in the degree of improvement and rate of learning. So therefore, in all our interventions in older adults, we are using strategy video games, not first-person shooter game, because we see a gender difference in preference and gender difference in learning in those games.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will just have 2 more minutes to wrap up. I see there's a raised hand from Dr. Aditya.
Actually, regarding this issue of video game, application of video game for cognitive training, I could see a lot of skepticism in the chat box that it might be very difficult to motivate or train individuals having dementia in this video game, etc. But I have one idea. I don't know whether you have already tried it or not. If we change the input interface from tapping, touching to gaze tracking or eye tracking, because I have seen smartphones, they are using selfie camera to gaze track, so that while you are nodding your head, the PDF page, they can get flipped, or they can scroll automatically based on your gaze. So if gaze is the input, then maybe it will help. I don't know whether voice can help, because even language can be difficult in advanced stages, but language might not be that affected in earlier stages. So gaze and voice, if that combination is used instead of touching or tapping or gesture, etc., because they have movement problems, they have difficulty in speed of movement. So if you remove that, maybe this training might not be that difficult, or the motivation might not be that difficult. I don't know whether you have tried already or not.
Yeah, so Dr. Aditya, that's a great idea. We are just, so I also teach game development. My background is mathematics and computer science. So I teach game development in the university. And, one of the things that we developed was like playing Sudoku or crossword with, these Samsung and the virtual reality glasses with just eye gaze, So if you fixate your gaze on one box for a long time, it will scroll through all the letters and you blink. And then the problem is that it's very cognitive challenging to give those instructions. It's much easier to say, just tap your fingers. So the game we developed are just one button press. You see a bird in a tree and another bird comes on the tree, and you have to say whether the bird you saw now is the same as the bird you saw, on the same tree, half a second or 2 seconds back, and you just have to press a button if you see it. And then if you don't see it, you don't press any button. So we have modified the games, and because it's tablet and, it's just one button, it's very easy to do it. So we're just testing this out for MCI. So that's one possibility. I would recommend doing board games in person as session. We had to do all these training online because COVID hit us and university shut down. And I could not shut down my clinical trial for a whole year, right? So we're still at a restricted, level. So I converted all my training online. So this was helpful to get the data online. We could send the tablet to people. We could train them remotely through WhatsApp or whatever. And then, we work with them, and it was a very simplified game. But if I was doing it in a community sample, I also have a big video game lab, which is open all day long. And then people can come and play. They do physical fitness, they do video games, and they can do it in small groups. And I think that would be more beneficial because you also get social interaction. And you can do board games then. And then, that would also address the issues about like people are not comfortable with video games or pressing button or computer and so on. Though tablet with one button is fairly easy to teach even rural population who are not used to technology at all.
Yes, I can understand now. And there is another a bit more costly alternative, that is emotive headset. That is 6-pair electrode headset, because they have created high impedance electrodes, which are Bluetooth enabled. So there is no wear attached, but it is costly. Where you have to only think, you don't have to even look or gaze, nothing, no finger tap, only you have to think about a specific thing, and the game environment, you will see the output happening there.
Yeah, it's very expensive. So we have an emotive.
The cost is a prohibiting factor right now.
I think it would be more helpful for meditation training. That's a great idea. So for Dr. Amitav Ghosh's kind of study, because the disadvantage of fMRI is that we don't get, as you're learning the game. So I also look at learning rates, right? So it would be nice to see individual differences in learning as they're learning to meditate or whatever. So when you do mindfulness training or meditation training, you're asked to focus your attention on an object or a thought while ignoring distractors, right? That's why it's very similar to this idea of focusing attention on a cognitive task. We see very similar brain networks change with mindfulness training and with certain cognitive training. So I think the emotive would be useful for that because it can track. The other thing we have used in lab is FNIRS, is near infrared system, and that was developed in the lab. So it's just a little band with 8 electrodes, and then that way people can move their head and give me data. So
only problem is that the latency is very high. So you cannot have very high time resolution there. That is the only disadvantage. EEG has very high time resolution.
Yeah, so FNIRS has very high time resolution, and the fMRI studies that I've done is 500 milliseconds time resolution. These are fast fMRIs.
If I may intervene,
let me stop here. Yes.
Dr. Aditya, you can continue your conversation with Dr. Bosak. I'm sure she will share her email ID, and this is definitely exciting and never-ending. I will take the last.
Thank you. I have already mailed Dr. Bosak.
Yes, thank you. We will take the last question from Indrani Mitro. Do you have a question or a comment? We will take that, and then we will end the session for tonight. Indrani Mitro, are you there? You have to unmute yourself, please.
Ma'am, I'm a doctor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask whether chronic stress can cause dementia in long term. This is number 1 question. And number 2, the caregivers of the Alzheimer or any other mental disease, the way they suffer, what is the preventive cares they can take early, because later they may face problems. That is we are facing. These are 2 questions, though time is short. Could I explain, ma'am?
Yes, you did. So the first question, the doctors are going to answer if anybody wants to take it up.
whether chronic stress can cause dementia.
Shall I try? Yes.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, it can. Indeed, it can, and that is one of the things which can trigger dementia, chronic stress, especially late onset depression, late onset anxiety. The other thing, currently there's a lot of work in the kind of a complete overhaul in our thinking that primary psychiatric disorders, including chronic stress, can go on for a very long time, and then subsequently can convert, if I may say within commas, into dementia, basically precipitating, triggering the same pathways which eventually lead to dementia. The same. So that is very well recognized, and the answer is yes, it can.
This is happening in your case, yes, sir.
In your second question was how you can prevent early on. Is that right?
Yes, cope up with as a caregiver.
From the caregiver's point of view, I think Nilanjana is the best person to answer that.
Nice.
The way we do things is in terms of managing caregiver stress is to first identify what exactly is the symptom of stress of the caregiver. Every person is an individual in their way. They think, they feel, they react or respond to a situation. So what we do first is identify all the symptoms that the caregiver has in terms of the stress. So it could be denial, it could be denial of the disease, it could be anger at the person, who's going through the experience of living with dementia. It could be social withdrawal from friends and activities that they used to do, that used to make them feel good. It could be anxiety about the future and facing another day with all the challenges that may come. It could be depression. Basically, they kind of physically and mentally break down, and their ability to cope with the situation, decreases. It could be exhaustion, physical exhaustion, because they are having to help with, daily activities. They are managing household activities. They are, at the same time, they're asked to talk to doctors. And over and above that, they sometimes are told to be patient, to be positive, to be motivated. And that's not an easy task for a caregiver. I mean, that creates a lot of stress. A lot of caregivers also, say they cannot sleep well because of the never-ending concerns they have, right? Whether my loved one is going to wander out, or whether my loved one is going to fall down if they have to go to the toilet at night. It could be, stress could be due to lack of concentration. They're unable to focus. And over and above that, they may also have, their own health condition, right? I mean, their own health. They may have comorbid conditions, which is, if it's a spouse, they are equally aged, and so they may, go through their own health issues. So I think the first step is identifying the exact symptom of stress, and then sitting with them it's not just an expert advice that here's a checklist, this is how you do things. It is trying to find out what is available in terms of resources to that caregiver. Because I can recommend do this, do that, but 5 days later, I check back and I see, well, you told me, but none of this is available to me. I don't, so we really need to be very practical and see what is going to work long term. Maybe take short goals, small goals, achieve it, and then take up longer goals. So that's how we do it. And it's not in a matter of day or two. It
Generalized.
Takes months. Yeah, it takes months. And yes, you are right. It cannot be generalized. Every caregiver is an individual. So, and they, their relationship with their loved ones with dementia, their, other, roles in the family, all these play a part in the management.
In India, is there any institution or forum, ma'am, for these caregivers, or we personally have to search out any forum or institution so that we can take care of?
Forum, well, like ARDSI has its forum for caregivers where, for us, ARDSI Calcutta, we used to have caregiver support meeting every month.
Okay.
And that's not just discussing about dementia, that could be also discussing about things that you do outside dementia. We also used to visit places of interest, maybe watch a movie, or just visit one of their favorite restaurants. So we do that. We do that from our organization. We used to. That's pre-COVID story. Post-COVID, things have stopped, but we are in touch with them online. So we have one caregiver session every month, and that addresses a certain topic. It could be food, it could be, name it. Yes, so there is support available. And I think many times caregivers really don't know where to look for help, because they are, they really don't have much time at hand to, sit and look for help. So, but there is help out there.
Okay.
Thank you.
So nice, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think we will end this wonderful session tonight. And thank you again, all of you, for participating in this seminar. Also the speakers, I think I cannot thank you enough for your time, so much of time, generous with your time. So we will continue to come back with more such seminars, not only in the month of September, but once in a while. And I think we look forward to associations, collaborations, doing work together, helping out each other, learning from each other, and this can be ongoing. So if there is anybody who wants to say anything at the end, the closing, the session, you're most welcome to do it, or else we will say good night, goodbye, good morning to Dr. Boshak, of course, and the others who are.
Maitri from Care Continuum, thank you so much for such an excellent session. Is like hearing Dr. Ghosh is always, I think I cannot thank him enough. It is always every day I think he talks the same thing, but it is new to me. I have to tell this. And nice to meet Dr. Boshak. And it is an excellent program. Nilanjan, it was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sir, would you like to say something? I thought you wanted to say something.
Yes, I just wanted to generally thank everybody for staying up so long with all of us, and the listeners. We still have near about 40 of them, 34, 35 still there, which is absolutely amazing. It's because we passed many of your dinner time. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here, and hopefully we'll make more sessions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care, all of you. Take care.